Chapter 397. The Overwatch Council broke into the garden like this today for Sir Zhou. Ming Qingda glanced at his elderly mother and said evenly, "Do you want to?" The old Ming matriarch glanced at him coldly and knew what he meant. Housekeeper Zhou was the head housekeeper of the Ming family and the accountant of the Juanshan conference. This person was too important. If the Overwatch Council found him, many of the inside stories of the Juanshan conference would be grasped by Fan Xian and, indirectly, by the emperor. Regardless of whether it was for the sake of Ming Garden's self-protection or for the safety of the Juanshan conference, Housekeeper Zhou would undoubtedly die. The problem was, the old Ming matriarch sighed gently and said, "It's not like you don't know that this Sir Zhou was sent to our home by the eldest princess. To kill or not to kill, we cannot make a decision." "The search is about to reach the back," Ming Qingda said expressionlessly, but a glimmer of cold laughter flashed through his heart. Juanshan conference? How could an organization of that level be something a wealthy merchant family like the Ming family should be involved in? As expected, they were now riding a tiger and couldn't escape even if they wanted to. He always had a deep prejudice against the old Ming matriarch and the eldest princess for tying them so tightly. As for the Juanshan conference, he avoided it even more. The old Ming matriarch slowly closed her eyes and said, "Don't worry. Sir Zhou's safety should be no problem." The old woman suddenly furrowed her brows and said hesitantly, "There is one thing I still don't understand. Why is the imperial envoy so sure that Sir Zhou is still hiding in Ming Garden? If he can't find him, how will he explain it to the people under heaven?" Ming Qingda's heart thumped, but a similar expression of confusion floated to his face. The old Ming matriarch thought for a bit and felt a bit tired. She shook her head weakly. Her white hair made her appear old. "I'm tired," the old woman said with disgust. "Don't let those Overwatch Council dogs disturb my rest." "Don't worry, mother." Ming Qingda walked to her side and placed his hands on her shoulders as if preparing to help her up. Evenly he said, "In the future, no one will disturb your rest." The old Ming matriarch turned her head in shock and saw the flash of guilt, fear and ferocity in her son's eyes. Then her mouth was covered and a leather rope was tied tightly around her throat. The old Ming matriarch wanted to cry out, but she couldn't. Her hands were held tightly by her own son. She could only kick her feet forcefully. That pair of small feet bounced randomly and made popping noises. The old woman's eyes flashed with endless fear and resentment as she stared at the principal maid not far away from her. She did not know how many trusted aides she had in the mansion, but at this moment, none of them were by her side. She did not know where they had died. The servant girl glanced at the old Ming matriarch and slowly turned around. The leather rope around her throat became tighter and tighter. The old Ming matriarch could not breathe. There was a burning pain in her chest and her eyes began to blur. She knew that everyone had betrayed her. Compared to the betrayal, the strong and thick sense of regret and hatred was even harder to suppress. It flowed out with her tears and saliva from the corners of her mouth. "You have to be more ruthless. Of course, sacrifices are needed to achieve great things." All the words rang out again in that instant, accompanied by the ringing in her ears before death, striking the old woman's heart. Her eyes bulged out and stared fixedly at her own son in front of her. Ming Qingda lowered his head and grabbed her hands without making a sound. Perhaps after a long time or perhaps it was only a short moment, the chest of the old woman sitting in the grand chair, the old Ming matriarch who had secretly influenced and controlled Jiangnan for a dozen years, made a muffled sound. Her body abruptly went limp. Her legs drooped weakly under the chair and no longer moved. When one was old, one should rest. The Overwatch Council's search of Ming Garden did not proceed smoothly. Although no one dared to stop him, Deng Ziyu could already feel the anger in the eyes of the people in Ming Garden growing stronger and stronger. Furthermore, the guards and thugs watching him in the dark could pull out their weapons and charge at him at any moment. Searching the house did not have any gentle methods. Along the way they overturned chests and cabinets, shouted harshly and entered people's boudoirs. This appearance indeed had the aura of a vicious wolf. At the same time, it aroused the hostility of everyone in Ming Garden. However, Deng Ziyu was not worried. Commissioner Fan had him enter the garden, so he must have been confident. As expected, although the people in Ming Garden looked at him with loathing and hatred, no one dared to stop him. However, Ming Garden was too big. After searching for a long time, he had only searched half the area. He could not find any trace of housekeeper Zhou's whereabouts. "I want to search the back garden," Deng Ziyu said to the young master of the Ming family, Ming Lansher, who had been by his side the entire time. "No." Ming Lansher stared fixedly into his eyes and scolded, "What exactly do you want to do?" Do you really think the Ming family is so easy to humiliate? There were women and relatives living in the back garden. How could it be easy to search? Ming Lansher used this as a pretext and angrily scolded the Overwatch Council officials. However, Deng Ziyu's face was heavy. He refused to back down even a step. In his hand, he held the official document personally written by Fan Xian. On it was the seal of the imperial envoy. There was sufficient reason to search. Of course, he could not do it in the name of the Overwatch Council. He could only do it in the name of the Jiangnan Road imperial envoy. It had to be known that the Overwatch Council could not interfere with local government affairs and, particularly, could not arbitrarily judge civil matters. Today they were playing a trick of selling dog meat under the sheep's head. Could be said that Fan Xian had borrowed soldiers. The two sides faced off at the door leading into the back garden. The servants and guards in Ming Garden had endured for a long time. At this time they finally couldn't hold it in any longer. Profanities came out one after another and cursed endlessly. Under their agitated emotions, the thugs and private soldiers that should have been hidden to the side also appeared and surrounded the nearly 40 Overwatch Council officials in the center. Deng Ziyu's face darkened and he coldly said, "Young Master Ming, are you going to continue searching, or are you going to defy the edict?" The imperial envoy's journey represented the emperor's edict. Who dared to defy it? Ming Lansher's face alternated between green and white. He gritted his teeth tightly and pretended to be humiliated and embarrassed. A moment later he roared angrily, "Go search. The heavens have eyes. I don't believe that the Overwatch Council will not get retribution for bullying people with power." Deng Ziyu did not care about all this. His hand grasping the hilt of the padao, he strode toward the back garden. Unexpectedly, he had not gone more than 10 steps when a person charged out. Although the person was wearing the clothes of a serving girl, looking at the quality of her clothing and attire, she was also an important figure in Ming Garden. The serving girl's face was deathly pale and her eyes were lifeless. It was as if she had seen a ghost. She crazily charged toward the crowd. As she charged, she yelled indistinctly, "Dead! Dead! Dead! Dead!" Deng Ziyu's heart jumped. He felt some kind of inauspicious omen. He furrowed his brows and stopped the serving girl. In a stern voice he asked, "What happened?" The serving girl's face exuded the temperament of a noble family she usually cultivated. However, at this moment she seemed to be in too much of a shock. It was completely miserable. She trembled for a long time and couldn't say a complete sentence. She could only tremble endlessly in front of Deng Ziyu. If Deng Ziyu had not held onto her arm, she would probably have collapsed to the ground long ago. The people from the Overwatch Council searching the garden did not recognize this serving girl, but the people of the Ming family knew her identity. They knew that she was the old Ming matriarch's personal serving girl and one of her trusted aides. At this moment, the people of the 6th branch were all gathered here. Seeing her like this, they couldn't help but jump in fright. They wondered what had happened. Ming Lansher anxiously snatched the serving girl from Deng Ziyu's hands and grabbed her by the collar. "What is it? Who died?" Deng Ziyu watched from the side with cold eyes. A strange light flashed through his eyes. The serving girl was shaken by the young master and finally came to her senses. She opened her mouth but didn't have time to say anything. First she wretchedly cried, "Oh, young master, the old matriarch, what happened to the old matriarch? The old matriarch, she's gone." The serving girl struggled to finish this sentence. Her head tilted and she fainted in Ming Lansher's arms. It was like Ming Lansher had been struck by lightning. He stood dumbstruck where he was. For a moment he couldn't believe his ears. The surrounding disciples of the 6th branch of the Ming family looked at each other with wide eyes and gaping mouths. They were frozen like countless frogs. It was as if they didn't know how to use a shocked expression to express the feelings in their hearts. The old matriarch had gone? The old matriarch had gone. In the deathly silent garden, after an indeterminable amount of time, the first cries suddenly exploded out. Immediately after, the cries rose up like a grand chorus. The cries, wretched cries and painful curses rose and fell. Many people fell to the ground in shock, unable to stand up no matter how hard they tried. The entire Ming Garden was completely enveloped in shock, grief and anger. Other than the 4th Ming master in the Suzhou government prison and the old Ming master at the old matriarch's side, there were also the masters of the 4th branch present. These 4 men cried and howled. They pushed aside Ming Lansher's dazed body, lifted the robes in front of them, and charged toward the back garden. At this time, no one cared about the rule that one could not enter the back garden without permission. Without anyone needing to shout, The hundreds of people who had appeared in Ming Garden rushed to the back garden with tears in their eyes as they followed the sound of crying like a cloud. The Overwatch Council officials in the center looked at each other and became the most awkward group of people. Deng Ziyu's pupils constricted slightly. He felt danger. He had come under orders to search the garden, but he had not thought that it would turn into such a situation. Although it was not clear how the old Ming matriarch had died, Deng Ziyu knew that her death was too clever and coincidental. It was so clever that the Overwatch Council had no choice but to take responsibility. In that instant earlier, he had seen Ming Lansher's expression out of the corner of his eye. It made a question grow in the depths of his heart. The news of the old Ming matriarch's death shocked everyone in Ming Garden. The guards all charged out and rushed to the side of the Overwatch Council people and surrounded them. They held weapons and crossbows in their hands, and a hateful gaze flashed through their eyes. Deng Ziyu furrowed his brows slightly. He knew that if one of the measures was not taken properly, it would result in a fight between the two sides. However, the commissioner had told him very clearly that the matter should not continue like this. He made a prompt decision and ordered his subordinates, the Overwatch Council officials, to also enter the back garden. In any case, Ming Garden was in chaos. No one had time to worry about them. Furthermore, the Ming Garden private soldiers holding weapons and watching him could not immediately act where the old Ming matriarch was about to die. After walking into the back garden for a long time, Deng Ziyu followed the sound of crying. Outside a quiet and secluded courtyard, he looked at the kneeling people on the ground and couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart. Sweeping his gaze, he saw that in the large central room under the thick beam, there was a person tied under a long white cloth. It was an old woman. The old woman's hands hung by her side with the tips of her feet pointing to the ground. Following the gentle spring wind, she floated in midair. This scene was as strange as it could be. In particular, the pair of eyes that refused to close were protruding outwards. Her pupils were filled with the blood that had been forced out when she was dying. They were filled with hatred and unwillingness as they looked outside. Coincidentally, they were looking at the Overwatch Council officials outside the courtyard. Deng Ziyu was shocked by the gaze of these two dead people. He hurriedly turned his neck and gave an order for his subordinates to be on guard and prepare to break out at any moment. Crying filled the courtyard. The people on the ground knelt and cried blood as they kowtowed endlessly. The old Ming matriarch was completely dead. Ming Garden would certainly hold this debt on the Overwatch Council. At such an impassioned time, no one knew what would happen. However, the way out in the back had long been blocked by Ming Garden's private soldiers. Filled with hatred, it would be extremely difficult to kill their way out. Not long after, Ming Qingda, whose forehead was already bleeding from kowtowing, and the brothers of the fourth branch untied the old matriarch's body from the beam. The current master of the Ming family forcefully suppressed his sorrow and made arrangements for the funeral. Only then did he lead the four brothers out of the courtyard. No one dared to speak, but everyone stared at the Overwatch Council people outside the courtyard with that kind of gaze. In Deng Ziyu's life, he had never found so many people who wanted to eat his flesh. The gazes of the Ming family already displayed this kind of hatred. He knew that this was not the time to retreat. Once he retreated and the news got out, it would bring great danger to the Overwatch Council. Once the old Ming matriarch died, the Overwatch Council people would retreat in fear. If this wasn't a guilty conscience, what was it? Thus, he made his face heavy and narrowed his eyes. The old Ming matriarch colluded with Dongyi and committed suicide to escape punishment. The funeral will be delayed for now. After the cause of death is investigated, we will deal with it. From the Overwatch Council's point of view, he had to appear particularly unyielding at this time. For the Ming family, the old ancestor had just died and was about to be framed by the Overwatch Council with the crime of committing suicide to escape punishment. No one could endure this. The sixth master of the Ming family liked wrestling the most. He was born big and rough, and his personality was also rough. Additionally, he was the youngest son of the Ming family and had always been the favorite of the old matriarch. His feelings for the old matriarch were also the deepest. Today, his mother had suddenly passed away and he was feeling sad and indignant. When he heard Deng Ziyu's words, he turned around and grabbed a chair and threw it at him. Deng Ziyu raised his padao and blocked the chair with a clatter. The sixth master's eyes were red, and the muscles on his face twisted. With a sharp howl, he said, "Someone beat this group of heartless dogs to death." The guards and servants of the Ming family had been waiting for these words. During this half a year, they had been oppressed by the Overwatch Council until they could barely breathe. No matter how much they tried, they could not protect themselves. Today, even the old matriarch had been forced to death. Looking at the Overwatch Council officials present, It was like looking at evil dogs that had broken into their own home. They were afraid that they would not be ruthless. Everyone let out a cry, picked up their weapons and charged forward, giving a flurry of attacks. From the moment he learned of the old matriarch's death, Deng Ziyu knew that the matter was about to get out of hand. He had his subordinates prepare for battle. Although the battle was sudden, they were not caught unprepared. The people around them formed a small defensive circle and pulled out the padao at their waists to fight. For a moment, only the sound of wind could be heard, only the light of knives and the shadow of swords could be seen, and occasionally, a wretched cry accompanied by the terrified screams of the Ming family women. Ming Garden was very lively today. There were many people in Ming Garden, and there were indeed a few ace instructors among the private soldiers. As soon as they met face to face, many people in the Overwatch Council were injured. Fresh blood sprayed out like it was free. Although the 4th Bureau was not the most powerful yamen of the Overwatch Council, they were, after all, people who had received professional training. Although there were people injured, there were immediately people from the inner circle who took over. With great difficulty, they maintained the defensive circle and successfully repelled the first wave of the Ming family's private soldiers' attack. But how long could they last? The 6th master was about to go crazy and yelled with all his might. A light slap rang out. The 6th master's face was slapped. He turned his head in shock and saw his older brother's face, which was still sorrowful but mostly angry. Ming Qingda lowered his voice and gritted his teeth. "You want the entire clan to accompany you in death?" Without waiting for the stunned 6th master to reply, Ming Qingda's face darkened and he yelled, "All of you stop." His voice was not very loud so many people did not hear. An excited flush appeared on Ming Qingda's pale face. He raised his voice and yelled, "Do you want to rebel?" After all, he was the nominal master of the Ming family. Particularly after the old Ming matriarch's death, the word nominal could be removed. Thus, with Ming Qingda's order, all of the Ming Garden thugs stopped and retreated. The crowd opened up a path. Ming Qingda walked coldly along this path until he was in front of the people of the Overwatch Council. The master of the Ming family looked coldly at Deng Ziyu like he was looking at a vicious dog waiting to die. Deng Ziyu did not show any weakness. He smiled coldly and said, "Master Ming, you asked a good question. Are you really preparing to rebel?" Ming Qingda's gaze carried a glimmer of desolation and disdain, but he still did not say anything. How could the Ming family respond at this time? Kill the 40 Overwatch Council officials in front of them? Then, without waiting for an edict from Jingdo, Sir Fan Jr., sitting in Suzhou as well as Governor Shui, could mobilize troops at any time to destroy Ming Garden. But they had forced his mother to death. All of this doubt and painful psychological struggle appeared on Ming Qingda's face and fell into the eyes of the Ming family and Overwatch Council officials. "Big brother?" The 6th master cried as he rushed to Ming Qingda's side. "Mother has been forced to death. We can't let these lackeys leave alive." After the people in Ming Garden gradually calmed down, they seemed to be able to understand the sadness and struggle in the old master's heart. The 6th master was no exception. However, the love between mother and son was deep. How could he endure this? The humiliation and pain you have inflicted on the Ming family. Ming Qingda's lips trembled slightly. His face was pale. He stared into Deng Ziyu's eyes and said, "The Ming family will return it tenfold. As for today, if you kneel and kowtow to the old matriarch to ask for forgiveness, I will let you leave the garden." The 6th master didn't quite believe his ears and anxiously said, "Big brother, we can't just let it go like this." On the contrary, it was Deng Ziyu opposite him who narrowed his eyes and thought for a moment. He then said, "Master Ming, you should know that the Overwatch Council kneels to the heavens, to the earth, and to the ruler. We will not kneel to anyone else." Ming Qingda's brows furrowed. It seemed that his spirit had been greatly damaged by the repeated attacks today. He could not stand steadily. With great difficulty, he held on to the 6th master's shoulder, but he also stopped the 6th master's impulsiveness. In a raspy voice he said, "Then, let us all perish together." As he spoke, Deng Ziyu felt that Ming Qingda's gaze on him seemed to be trying to express some hidden meaning, but he could not figure it out. Ming Qingda sighed in his heart. He had not expected that the Overwatch Council would be so unyielding. In the face of such a dangerous situation, they were not even willing to make some superficial concessions. The confrontation continued. The situation could explode at any moment. There were always 2 clever people among the 6 masters of the Ming family. Seeing that the situation was not right and hearing their big brother's words of perishing together, they felt a glimmer of fear. As merchants, how could they have the right to perish together with the court? Throwing an egg at a rock, putting on such an appearance would not cause the rock to lose anything. Furthermore, he was not the old Ming matriarch's own flesh and blood. Why should he pay with his life? Thus, the second and third Ming masters surrounded him with impassioned and sorrowful expressions on their faces. They leaned close to Ming Qingda's ear and spoke quietly. They advised the old master to prioritize the lives of tens of thousands of people in the family and to temporarily endure. When it came time to avenge the old matriarch, they had to plan slowly. Ming Qingda had personally killed the old matriarch, so he already had a guilty conscience. The paleness on his face was not purposely faked. In such a situation, he had to act as if he had an irreconcilable enmity with the Overwatch Council and could not coexist. At this moment, with the second and third Ming masters coming out to persuade him, his heart felt slightly more at ease. He put on an expression of struggle and pain. After an indeterminable amount of time, they suddenly heard a clamor outside the garden. Immediately following it was the sound of horse hooves. Countless people and horses had charged in. Ming Qingda's heart trembled. He thought to himself that the Overwatch Council's Black Knights were clearly still in Jiangbei. It was impossible for them to have charged into the garden at this moment. Who were the newcomers? Thousands of soldiers galloped in on horseback. Long spears stood in great numbers. The military might was impressive. Immediately, they separated the Ming Garden's private soldiers from the Overwatch Council officials. For a moment, dust gradually rose and the atmosphere was imposing. The people who came were the provincial soldiers the Jiangnan governor had sent over. Using an urgent order, they rushed quickly and finally arrived before the disaster happened. They stood between the two groups of people with swords drawn and bows drawn. The leader was a general. He already knew what had happened. With a serious expression, he said something to Ming Qingda. He had wanted to go in and pay his respects to the old Ming matriarch, but he knew that Ming Garden had not been set up yet. Furthermore, the old Ming matriarch had died too. Well, he could only give up. Following the provincial soldiers into the garden was a member of the Qinian unit of the Overwatch Council. He moved closer to Deng Ziyu's side and told him the two sentences the commissioner had said. Deng Ziyu was startled for no reason. He thought that it would not be a problem to retreat. With thousands of provincial soldiers here, even if the Ming family wanted to act, they would not have the ability. The problem was, wouldn't this confirm the matter of the Overwatch Council hounding the old Ming matriarch to death? He didn't quite understand what Fan Xian was thinking. The best response right now was clearly to bring in the Black Knights and use this as an excuse to destroy the Ming family. However, the arrival of the provincial soldiers protected the lives of the Overwatch Council officials and prevented the possibility of the Black Knights massacring the garden. As for the cause of the old Ming matriarch's death that Deng Ziyu had long suspected, only the Suzhou government had the right to investigate. The Overwatch Council did not have this right. Furthermore, the government officials in Jiangnan were all people of the Ming family, so it was impossible for them to find any problems. Thus he became more and more confused. How exactly did the commissioner arrange this? Were they still going to capture housekeeper Zhou? Were they going to allow this matter to continue developing like this? In the depths of spring, Suzhou was wrapped in silver. It was not snow, but it was colder than snow. Almost all of the Suzhou people wore mourning clothes. The snow-white strips of cloth were like icy imperial edicts, narrating the old Ming matriarch's benevolence and achievements toward the Jiangnan people. The news of the old Ming matriarch's death spread throughout Jiangnan in almost a night. The specific circumstances of her death were passed around from different people's mouths and became more and more bizarre. Regardless of which version of the news, the spearhead was pointed at the Overwatch Council. The anger of the people began to accumulate, but they could not find an outlet to vent it at the moment. The Overwatch Council Yamen had always been secretive, so there was temporarily no heroic scene of tens of thousands of people closing their doors to demand justice. As for the Hua Garden where the imperial envoy was, there was a heavy guard. The people did not have the courage to demonstrate for now. Thus, everyone could only wear mourning clothes and use the grief and anger on their faces and the bitter curses of the marketplace to express their silent protest. This was directed at the Overwatch Council and also at Sir Fan Jr. The old Ming matriarch's mourning hall had not yet opened, so the officials and nobles who had come from various places to offer their condolences were temporarily staying in Suzhou. All of Suzhou was enveloped in a cold atmosphere, completely different from the spring scenery around it. However, Fan Xian did not care about this. His skin was thick enough, his heart was black enough, and his spirit was strong enough to watch the scene of the city in mourning as if it were a movie from his previous life. As for the curses directed at him in the open and in the dark, he could completely ignore them. He sat on the top floor of the Suzhou branch of Xinfeng restaurant and was only worried about Haitang. That day Haitang had gone to capture Mr. Zhou of the Juanshan conference for him and still hadn't returned. He didn't know if she was in any danger. Thinking of this, he couldn't help smiling self-mockingly. The only people in this world who could harm Duo were those great grandmasters. He picked up his bowl and slurped down a few mouthfuls of noodles. He sighed with satisfaction and then said, "Master Ming, I've been tricked badly by you this time." Ming Qingda knelt by his side and repeatedly kowtowed. In a fawning voice, he said, "Sir's thoughts are as agile as the long river, and your aura is as lofty as a mountain. How could you care about these little winds around you?" To be continued. If you want to know what happened after, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 398. Torrential River Water? The Yellow River Flooding? Rise. Now you are the true master of the Ming family. You don't have to be so careful in front of me. Fan Xian used an amused gaze to examine Ming Qingda. He then picked up the bowl of noodles and slurped it down. Ming Qingda had secretly come to Xinfeng restaurant and avoided everyone's eyes and ears. He was incomparably careful and nervous. After all, at this moment, an atmosphere of grief and indignation was accumulating in Suzhou. The tens of thousands of people in the Ming family were all looking at him, the master of the family. If people knew that he had secretly come to see the imperial envoy, he would probably not be able to continue being the clan leader. The problem was, after seeing him today, Imperial Envoy Fan Xian still refused to give a clear answer. This made Ming Qingda feel a glimmer of strangeness in his heart. Fan Xian put down the bowl and thought for a bit. "Let's not talk about anything else for now. I only want to ask you, the Mr. Zhou you promised me, where is he now?" Ming Qingda felt the coldness and coercion in the Imperial Envoy's words and unconsciously lowered his head to defend himself. "That person. I was unable to control him and let him out of the garden. This was my mistake. Please punish me." "Punish?" Fan Xian laughed self-mockingly. "Now that you've done this, how can I punish you?" Ming Qingda sighed and said, "Even now, do you still not believe in my sincerity?" Fan Xian shook his head and said, "Last time in the palace treasury courtyard, I had already said it. Hold the bowl like a dragon spitting out pearls, use chopsticks like a phoenix nodding its head, eat until you're 80% full, and if you can't finish, take it away. Being a person and doing things is the same as eating. Your posture has to be beautiful and you have to know your limits." He stared into Ming Qingda's eyes. "In our agreement, you sold people to me and acted as a mediator, but it did not involve the contents behind. You did not report this matter to me and did it yourself. The present situation puts me in a difficult position." Ming Qingda was silent for a moment and then quietly said, "Now that things have come to this, in order to prevent the Ming family from turning into smoke and clouds in my hands, some people blocking the front must rest. I trust that you can understand. Understanding is one thing, but doing this without my permission is another. Don't think that by borrowing my subordinates to enter the garden and taking advantage of the situation, you can completely cover up this matter. You have to know that I have paid a great price in this matter. Presently, the entire Jiangnan is watching me. Think about how you will cover up this matter." Ming Qingda was speechless. A moment later he said, "This is Qingda's fault. I will think of a way." Fan Xian nodded. In truth, he didn't really trust this ruthless old fox in front of him. Ming Qingda saw the imperial envoy's expression relax slightly. Only then did he gather his courage and say, "Sir, there were people in Ming Garden surrounding and attacking Overwatch Council officials. This matter should be investigated." Fan Xian listened to these words and couldn't resist smiling. Not only was this old Ming master ruthless, his skin was also as thick as his own. He sighed and said, "If these words were heard by outsiders, I don't know how scared they would be. The master of the Ming family is actually urging the Overwatch Council to investigate Ming Garden." Ming Qingda smiled slightly and said, "If I don't do this, how can I make you believe in my heart?" "Relax." Fan Xian calmed down. "My identity and position are different from yours. You have no way of handing Sir Zhou to me, but I will still do what I promised you. I will handle 6th Ming, so don't worry too much. However," he stared into Ming Qingda's eyes and said forcefully, "It's still the same words as before. You tricked me this time. Now everyone in Jiangnan wants to eat my flesh. You have to think of a way to deal with this matter. Otherwise, you know the consequences." Ming Qingda bowed sincerely and accepted the order. He then carefully asked, "What about 4th? Fan Xian was silent and did not reply to his question. Ming Qingda sighed in his heart. He knew that the imperial envoy had to leave a few more weaknesses in his hands before he could be at ease in letting him sit in the position of the master of the Ming family. As for the matter of the fourth master's prison break, the Overwatch Council had witnesses and could throw them out at any time to beat him to death. Fan Xian glanced at him with a not quite there smile. He thought, how could a chess piece like the fourth Ming master be taken out now? If he didn't pursue the matter of the prison break, then the fourth Ming master would be useless. If he did, then the fourth Ming master would just die. Wouldn't it be a pity to die like this? Right now, your family's emotions are still agitated. Don't worry about the matter of cleaning out the old matriarch's trusted aides, Fan Xian warned. He suddenly smiled and said, you're better at this kind of thing than I am. My words are a bit unnecessary. Ming Qingda quickly and respectfully said, it is all thanks to the imperial envoy's guidance along the way. Don't say that. The corner of Fan Xian's mouth twitched and he stopped him. The last powerful move was not something I could think of. Also, Fan Xian said quietly. Fan Xian said in a quiet voice, after the matter has calmed down, you can make arrangements for Xia Qifei to return to his ancestral home. Ming Qingda abruptly raised his head and looked at Fan Xian with a pair of calm eyes that carried complicated emotions. A moment later he faintly said, Sir, you still don't trust me. Say less of these pompous words, Fan Xian said. You know, and I also know. You don't trust me. Naturally, I also don't trust you. Xia Qifei is the one I truly trust. As long as he doesn't enter the Ming garden to discuss matters, our agreement cannot be considered complete. The wrinkles on Ming Qingda's forehead appeared to deepen. He took a deep breath and said, Qing and I had disagreements when he was young. I'm afraid he hates me to the bone. Fine, according to the imperial envoy's orders, I am willing to back down. However, the old matriarch has just passed away. This is a time when emotions are running high. Everyone knows that Qing is your trusted aide. For him to return to his ancestral home, I'm afraid I won't be able to suppress the backlash from the tens of thousands of people in the clan. Fan Xian shook his head and straightforwardly said, What time is this? Everyone in Jiangnan hates me. Do you think I care about the backlash from the tens of thousands of people in your clan? This situation was created by you. Naturally, you will have to settle the backlash from the people in the clan. I only want the result. As for the process, that is something you should worry about. Ming Qingda's expression darkened slightly and he said, This matter is truly difficult. There is nothing difficult about it. Fan Xian looked at him mockingly. I have always admired your methods. Since the old matriarch has already been buried, the Overwatch Council has no right to investigate anything. However, I have always sent people to keep an eye on the grave. Making things difficult for you is better than making things difficult for me. If I am truly troubled to an unbearable point, then you should be troubled for the rest of your life. The Overwatch Council already had enough information on Ming Qingda. If Ming Qingda had other thoughts before Fan Xian's days were good, Ming Qingda would certainly be the first to be cut into pieces. Since things had progressed to this point, Ming Qingda knew that although his shrewd and ruthless plan had allowed him to sit in the position of the true master of the Ming family, he had also sat on a volcano. In particular, the last move he had hidden from the imperial envoy. Although it made it so that the Overwatch Council could no longer pressure the Ming family, it had truly angered Fan Xian. Fan Xian tore off all pretenses and began to make naked threats. Faced with this kind of naked threat, Ming Qingda knew he could only accept it completely. He had done so many treasonous things. He had not expected that in the end, it would all benefit the other party. He raised his head angrily and looked at the imperial envoy. Sir, good plan. Fan Xian was not angry at all. He chuckled and said, The old Ming master likes to scheme against others. Now he thinks he has been schemed against by me. Naturally, he feels uncomfortable. However, don't think too highly of me. In this area, I truly do not have much talent. His voice became cold. One can be strong without desires. The old Ming master has asked for too many things, so naturally he will give me too many opportunities. As for scheming, I have always thought that such things as schemes are never as terrifying as direct power. After scheming, I have instead ruined your life. Old Ming master, in the future, it is best to be more honest and do things more sincerely. Ming Qingda fell silent. You can go back first. There are still many things I need you to deal with, such as the resentment the people in the clan have toward me that I need you to appease, Fan Xian said with a smile. If there are any arrangements in the future, I will send someone to let you know. He thought for a bit and finally warned, I know you are very afraid of the Juanshan conference, however for now don't tear off all pretenses with them. I need the Ming family to still have a position in the Juanshan conference. Ming Qingda knew there was no other way. He could only agree like this for now. He stood up and walked down the stairs. However, his back was slightly hunched, revealing his old age. After Ming Qingda left, the head of the Qinian unit of the Overwatch Council, Deng Ziyu, flashed out from behind the curtain. The shock on his face could not be hidden no matter how hard he tried. Only now did he know that the commissioner and the master of the Ming family had made so many secret agreements in private. Following Fan Xian's orders, he sat down. Deng Ziyu opened his mouth wide and stared blankly for a while before he organized his words. Unexpected, truly unexpected. Fan Xian couldn't resist shaking his head. What unexpected? Ming Qingda is a clever man. He knows this is the court's intention. He does not hope to be able to oppose the court. He only hopes to use a relatively peaceful method to protect the livelihood of the tens of thousands of people in the Ming family, and on this point he and his mother have an unbridgeable gap. Under these circumstances, if he doesn't come to find me, who can he find? Of course, I still underestimated him. Fan Xian sighed. I didn't think he would play such a game in the end. Thus, the Jiangnan people are all watching us. Xueqing is also greatly shocked. Regardless of which way the court leans, it makes it impossible for us to continue pressuring the Ming family. On one hand, he colluded with the government to stabilize his position as the master of the Ming family. On the other hand, he secretly acted ruthlessly to stir up the emotions of the common people and protect the Ming family's temporary interests. This Ming Qingda indeed did not disappoint me. However, he didn't calculate one thing. He used me and I used him. The problem is, I have much more confidence than he does, so in the end he can only be used by me. Everyone miscalculated one thing, Fan Xian explained seriously. Including what I said to Xueqing, it was all to scare him. You all think I can wipe out the Ming family at any time? In reality, this is impossible. That is why I need to use Ming Qingda. Deng Ziyu looked in shock at the thoughtful commissioner. Fan Xian closed his eyes for a moment and then opened them again. Slowly he said, if the Ming family truly rebelled, what could I do? Would I really move the Black Knights into Suzhou to slaughter the garden? Yes, I could wipe out the sixth branch of the Ming family, make the blood flow like a river and cover the fields with corpses, but what benefit does this bring me? He smiled and shook his head. After a period of cleansing, relying on the power of the court, and adding the accusation of rebellion to Ming Garden, within half a year, the entire Jiangnan would be as silent as cicadas in winter. No one would dare to say anything. The court would smoothly take over the Ming family's enormous property. Everything would go according to the emperor's plan. His face became cold. But what benefit does this bring me? Deng Ziyu was silent. The commissioner had repeated, what benefit does it bring me? Twice, and had unconsciously pitted himself against the emperor's plan. This made his heart feel cold, but he didn't dare say anything. He understood that if they truly slaughtered Ming Garden and created such a terrifying storm, although the emperor would certainly admit to framing the Ming family for rebellion, in order to appease the Jiangnan people, the Overwatch Council would certainly be severely punished, and the commissioner would not have a good time. To work for the court and take the Ming family into the national treasury, yet he had to give up his own benefits. Fan Xian would not do such a stupid thing. This is why at the beginning I had to find Xia Qifei, then the fourth Ming disciple, and finally Ming Qingda, Fan Xian explained in an even voice. The situation in Jiangnan appears chaotic, but it is actually very clear. Xueqing is the emperor's trusted aide, watching from the side. I could only muddy the waters a bit more. Taking in the Ming family can only be done peacefully. Fan Xian slightly lowered his eyelids. If I do too much, the emperor could throw me out at any moment. You should understand this. Deng Ziyu felt a chill in his heart. He didn't understand why the commissioner kept referring to himself as His Majesty in front of him. He didn't understand why the commissioner would tell him such taboo matters. Was he testing him? The old Ming matriarch has always been an important figure in the Juanshan conference, Fan Xian continued. As long as she was on the throne, it was impossible for the Ming family to be taken down peacefully by me. Although her death has brought me some trouble overall, I am willing to accept this result. Fan Xian looked into Deng Ziyu's eyes and quietly said, You've always been by my side. Of course, it has not been easy for me. Deng Ziyu sighed in his heart and bowed without saying anything. Fan Xian walked to the railing on the top floor of Xingfeng restaurant. Narrowing his eyes, he looked at the people in mourning on the street below and the incense shops working hard in the distance. He knew that all of Suzhou was busy for the old woman who had died. Countless nobles had already gathered here, waiting to go to the morning hall to pay their respects. Deng Ziyu followed behind him and looked at the scene below. He sighed and said, "There are too many ways to deal with the Ming family. The current situation does not seem to be the best." Fan Xian calmly replied, "So, Ming Qingda's last move against me? I'll get it back in the future." In the present Jiangnan, the old Ming matriarch had mysteriously died and Ming Qingda had secretly thrown his lot in with Fan Xian. On the surface, the Ming family in Xinjiang might still be able to guarantee something, but in secret, it was very different from previous years. Fan Xian held down the fort in Jiangnan. With both hands open, the palace treasury's smuggling business would be carried out with great fanfare. Without the Ming family holding him back, it would go much more smoothly. When all was said and done, the price Fan Xian paid was nothing more than the illusory word of reputation. In his view, forcing the old Ming matriarch to death had thrown the hearts of the people into chaos. The emperor would certainly find some reason to give an edict to reprimand him. He was very happy to bring shame to himself like this. In reality, there were a lot of inside information that affected Fan Xian's decision-making that he did not tell Deng Ziyu. For example, why he could not move the Black Knights and why he was afraid the emperor would throw him out. Fan Xian knew very well that in the present world, it was already an anomaly for such a young and powerful official like him to appear with such great power. Although the emperor still trusted him very much, who knew when the emperor would suddenly change his mind? Judging from the emperor's actions these years, he was a suspicious person. Thus, he had always watched him strictly to prevent him from getting involved with the military. Move the Black Knights into the province? Fan Xian smiled self-mockingly. Even if he used his butt to think, he knew how many people would be afraid once such a ruthless method was displayed. The recent disturbance in the Ministry of Revenue in the capital made Fan Xian even more clearly see that before the emperor made up his mind to eliminate the eldest princess power, he had already begun to be wary of the existence of the old Fan family. In Jingdo, the emperor did not use the matter of the Ministry of Revenue's deficit to successfully force his father to step down. Who knew if the Ming family matter would be blown up and he would take away his power? The word power appeared simple, but it was like a drug. Once consumed, it was difficult to get rid of. Although Fan Xian was clear-headed, he could not bear to reduce the power in his hands. For one, he was used to the benefits of power. For another, in order to protect himself and others, he needed the power in his hands. Taking a step back in order to advance, he would first let his reputation be damaged. Deng Ziyu followed beside him and lowered his voice. Recently, the situation has been tense. Based on the 8th Bureau's opinion, perhaps you can condescend to offer a few sticks of incense. Given Fan Xian's identity as the imperial envoy, if he went to offer sacrifices to the old Ming matriarch, it could clearly ease the present situation. However, Fan Xian only shook his head with a cold expression and said, "There's no need." Deng Ziyu was slightly startled. He didn't understand why. Fan Xian extended his hand and pointed at the grief-stricken commoners in the street. In a quiet voice he said, "Actually, the hearts of the people are not scary. What is scary are those who stand above the people and can use the hearts of the people. As long as I can satisfy those people, what the people think will not affect the overall situation." To be continued. If you want to know what happens next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 399. It began to rain again in Suzhou. It was said that the rain upstream of the Yangtze River was even heavier. The attention of the court officials was focused on the section of the river embankment above Shazhou that was riddled with holes. Even though Fan Xian was in Suzhou, his gaze could not stop from falling there. Yang Wanli had long gone to take up his post in the river transport governor's yamen. The palace treasury had transferred money, and the national treasury had also arrived. The money for the river transport had never been as plentiful as this year. However, the time to repair the river this year was too late. No one knew if it could withstand the summer floods. The rain fell heavily. The summer heat that had just arrived in Jiangnan was immediately drenched. All that was left was a cold sense of the end of spring. For the people of Jiangnan, this rain only increased the melancholy and grief in the depths of their hearts. Not many people thought of the homeless people upstream of the Yangtze River who had no houses to live in and no clothes to wear. The old Ming matriarch's funeral was about to begin. Fan Xian watched all of this coldly and had no reaction at all. After Deng Ziyu, his subordinates, including the governor's manor, the Overwatch Council, and the Palace Treasury Transport Company, all advised him that it would be best to light a stick of incense in the morning hall. The imperial envoy had expressed his stance. Given the Qing people's reverence for the court, they should not continue to make trouble. However, Fan Xian stubbornly refused this suggestion. In his opinion, it was just the funeral of an old man. What was the big deal? It was just the death of one person. If the matter upstream of the Yangtze River was not handled well, who knew how many people would die? All of the officials sighed in despair at the imperial envoy's stance. They wondered if the imperial envoy did not feel the undercurrent surging among the people. At the end of the month, the sound of mourning filled Ming Garden. White cloth hung high, and the mourning hall was spacious. It was the 7-day period for the coffin to stop. After the 7-day period, it was time to announce the funeral. According to the funeral rules of Qing Kingdom, after 7 days, the news of the funeral had to be spread to friends, family, and even enemies. Regardless of what enmity there was between the two parties in life, the rule of announcing the funeral could not be avoided. The original intention of this ceremony was to erase all enmity with death. Often, enemies in life would use the news of the funeral to personally go to the mourning hall to offer their condolences. It was the same as ending the wrongs in life. From then on, they would be separated by yin and yang and have nothing to do with each other. The high officials and nobles who had been waiting in Suzhou for the Ming Garden's funeral all received the white invitation from the Ming Garden. One by one, they tidied up their clothing and expressions and headed for the Ming Garden. Everyone's eyes were fixed on Hua Garden because, according to the rules and the old Ming matriarch's identity and position, the white card announcing the death should also be sent to Hua Garden and into the hands of the imperial envoy. As for what the imperial envoy planned to do, it all depended on how he dealt with this white invitation. No one expected that when Ming Garden delivered the white invitation to Hua Garden only politely welcomed the third Ming master in, drank a cup of tea and then sent the third Ming master out. The white invitation was not accepted. The third Ming master immediately flew into a rage outside Hua Garden. He cursed angrily with obscenities and then spat viciously on the stone steps in front of Hua Garden. Immediately, a servant came out and used water to wash away the phlegm. Everything in the world couldn't be raised above the word reason, and in the hearts of ordinary people, the dead were the most important. This was the universal reason. The imperial envoy did not give the dead any face. It made all the people feel a glimmer of shock and anger. What surprised and angered everyone even more was that before the old Ming matriarch's mourning hall opened, the Overwatch Council acted again and captured the sixth master, who had led the resistance against the search in Ming Garden. They used the name of investigating Dongyi spies. Thus, not only the Suzhou government, but even the governor's manor could not say much. After the Overwatch Council secretly captured the sixth master, they immediately sent him to the custody of the Shazhou Navy and did not hand him over to the local authorities. No one knew if there was anyone taking the lead, but from the second day onwards, there was an endless stream of people gathering in front of Hua Garden. They cursed loudly and shouted incomprehensible slogans, such as severely punishing the true culprit and releasing the innocent. What was even more headache-inducing was that the Jiangnan students and scholars had also joined in. Young students were hot-blooded. Furthermore, Sir Fan Jr.'s recent actions made these students feel disillusioned with their idols. They were furious and clamored loudly and bitterly. Hua Garden was as calm as usual. However, the Jiangnan Road Governor's Yamen was afraid of a popular revolt and moved a group of soldiers to stand guard in front of Hua Garden, chasing the agitated and angry scholars to the end of Chang Street. That afternoon, under heavy guard, Governor Xueqing passed through the agitated crowd with great difficulty and entered Hua Garden. In the study, he and Fan Xian argued for a long time. In the end, no one could convince the other. In the end, Xueqing helplessly asked, "If we incite the people to surround the garden and not leave, where will the court's face go?" Fan Xian coldly said, "Surrounding the prince with evil intentions. If you still don't move your troops, I will." Xueqing was startled. Only now did he remember that there was still a third prince living in Ming Garden. If he allowed the people of Suzhou to surround Hua Garden and the news got back to Jingdou, he wouldn't be able to be the governor anymore. The leading scholars would probably have to pay with their lives. As the Jiangnan governor, he did not dare to allow such a terrifying thing to happen within his jurisdiction. After thinking for a moment, he sincerely asked, "What should we do?" Given Governor Xueqing's shrewdness and experience, taking care of a few hot-blooded scholars was a small problem. Most importantly, he understood that this was clearly an atmosphere Fan Xian had purposely created. Without knowing what Fan Xian's true intentions were, there was no need for him to forcefully interfere and sink himself into this mess. Fan Xian glanced at him and said, "They are all hot-blooded young people. I don't want to make things difficult for them, however, This continuous rain will make it cold at night. Their hot-blooded hearts will also go cold, so naturally they will disperse. Xueqing's brows furrowed slightly. And if they don't disperse? Fan Xian smiled coldly. Righteous indignation cannot be eaten. If they don't disperse at night, then it means that some of the people surrounding the garden are not acting out of righteous indignation but have other goals. The goal those people hiding in the dark wanted to achieve was simple. They didn't need to incite a civil revolt. They just needed to make the people's reactions bigger and have the matter travel back to Jingdo. The emperor would have to respond. Xueqing thought for a moment and immediately understood Fan Xian's meaning. He said, "Should the governor's manor take action in this matter?" Fan Xian shook his head. "This is a matter of bad reputation. I'll take responsibility for it myself. Sir, just look after Hua Garden. After all, the third prince's safety is of the utmost importance." Xueqing understood. He couldn't help but feel a glimmer of strangeness and shock in his heart. According to the common sense of officialdom, the matter of suppressing a civil revolt had to be done together by everyone above. However, Fan Xian's solitary and stubborn appearance did indeed reduce the pressure on him. After the discussion ended, Xueqing took his leave. Fan Xian sat alone in the study in a daze. Shortly after, he couldn't resist smiling self-mockingly. Haitang had been gone for many days and still hadn't returned. If he couldn't capture Sir Zhou, then the Ming Garden coup would mean he had lost 1/3 of the benefits. As for the angry Suzhou people, Fan Xian didn't care at all. With Ming Qingda leading, the matter would certainly not go beyond the critical line of intensification. The problem was, it was clear that behind this mass movement, there were many shadows of people hiding in the dark. Without anyone instigating, how could the cowardly citizens of the Qing court have the courage to come to the imperial envoy's manor and raise their voices? Concerning this matter, Fan Xian had already made ample preparations. Now that he had Xueqing's reply, his heart was even more at peace. The matter was indeed as Fan Xian had expected. When the sky darkened, the crowd outside had gradually dispersed. There were only the students with square headscarves on their heads, their faces full of righteousness, and a few unknown citizens mixed together. With the governor's manor's military watching, these people could only stand at the end of Chang Street and chant, angrily accusing the imperial envoy of treating human life like grass and harming the Jiangnan people. No one knew who started it, but the crowd gradually became excited and pressed toward Hua Garden. For a moment, the governor's manor soldiers did not dare to act ruthlessly and slowly retreated. As they got closer and closer to Hua Garden, the crowd stopped. There was a clamor of voices and all kinds of ugly curses were thrown out. However, the students were not all idiots. They knew that cursing was one thing, but they were all cursing about the Overwatch Council and did not touch upon Fan Xian's 18 generations of ancestors. Everyone under heaven knew that Fan Xian's ancestors were the emperor's ancestors. Cursing the Overwatch Council that all scholars hated to the bone was fine, but cursing the emperor's 18 generations of ancestors? Everyone just wanted to vent the anger of the old Ming matriarch, who had died an unjust death. They didn't want to throw their lives into it. Hua Garden was still silent. One could faintly see the flickering lights inside, and the sound of stringed instruments came through the rain. The soldiers of the governor's manor were on standby. They lit torches in their hands and lit up the outside of Hua Garden. The rain was like a thread and had long soaked the bodies of the students still outside Hua Garden. They looked at each other and wiped the rain off their faces, not daring to believe their own ears. Suzhou was already like this, they were already like this, yet the imperial envoy still had the leisure to do this, like this. They were drenched in the rain, yet the imperial envoy was listening to a play. The students strangely became angry. The angry cursing that had just stopped due to exhaustion rang out again. Amidst the angry cursing, a person wearing a gray unlined garment was sandwiched in the crowd. His eyes rolled around a few times. He took out something from his clothes and threw it into Hua Garden. The item fell into the garden and only made a muffled sound. There was no sound of an explosion. Instead, a thunderous curse came from Hua Garden. Who the F***ck is throwing a bag of dog blood? Throwing dog blood was one of the most insulting tricks. Although it was childish like a child throwing a tantrum, throwing it into the imperial envoy's Hua Garden was a big deal. The students were also stunned and the cursing stopped for a moment. They thought to themselves, which classmate is this? How could he be so daring? Just as they were thinking this, 3 black shadows flashed across Hua Garden. It was 3 swordsmen of the 6th Bureau of the Overwatch Council. They watched the troublemakers on the street outside the garden coldly. The crowd fell silent for a moment. Suddenly, someone exploded with a cry, "The Overwatch Council is going to kill people." We. A shadow charged into the crowd. The sound of fanning the flames suddenly stopped. It was like someone had grabbed the throat of a duck's fate. The crowd was startled and parted in the middle. A large man wearing cotton clothing walked out coldly with a gray-clothed person's throat in his hand. The large man wearing cotton clothing was the leader of the Tiger Guards, Gauda. He had been watching the people fanning the flames on Fan Xian's orders. Given his ability, it was easy for him to take the person. He threw the gray-clothed man to the ground and stepped on his chest. The sound of the man's sternum breaking could be heard. The students looked at this wretched scene. Hot blood rushed to their heads. They surrounded Gauda in the middle and yelled, "Murder! The Overwatch Council is killing people." This scene scared the surrounding officials of the governor's manor. They urged their horses forward, ready to send troops to suppress the situation at any moment. Gauda coldly picked up the gray-clothed man and shook him like he was shaking a sack. Clink, clink, clink. Who knew how many things fell from the man's body? First, he didn't die. The gray-clothed man's moan answered Gauda's words. The student's emotions calmed slightly. Gauda coldly said, "Second, you are here to seek justice. This person is here to tempt the imperial envoy to kill you. There is a difference, so there is a difference in treatment." These are his original words. Only now did the students come to their senses. Looking down, they couldn't help but jump in fright. They saw that there were not only bags of dog blood on the gray-clothed man's body. There were also fire seeds and lamp oil. Only now did everyone understand that if they allowed this person to do bad things in the crowd and actually burn down Hua Garden, where the prince and imperial envoy lived, they would certainly be killed on the spot by the court as thugs. His original words are two, Gauda said coldly. Everyone was intimidated by his imposing manner and listened obediently. If there is injustice in your chest, you have to vent it. This is the nature of young people. I don't blame you. Gauda continued to narrate Fan Xian's words. But to be incited by someone and not know the truth, how stupid is that? If there is injustice you want to vent, you have to find the right way. To make such a racket like a shrew in the marketplace is truly shameful. Listening to these words, the students felt very dissatisfied. A student who seemed to be the leader stood out boldly. The Overwatch Council handles matters unfairly, forcing people to die. I once went to the Suzhou government to make a report, but officials protect each other. Furthermore, the Suzhou government fears the power of the Overwatch Council and does not accept the complaint. Dare I ask the imperial envoy, what other way can I vent my anger? Gauda glanced at that person coldly. Sir, since you have the courage to gather outside the garden to make trouble, do you have the courage to enter the garden to discuss matters? The students immediately began to make a ruckus. Some said they couldn't enter, others said they had to enter. There were many different opinions. In the end, they all focused their gazes on the student who had stood out earlier. This student was a student of Jiangnan Road's White Deer Academy. His name was Fang Tingsher. He came from a poor background but was very knowledgeable. He had always been deeply admired by his peers and was the hidden leader of the students. Fang Tingsher thought for a moment and gritted his teeth. From his clothes, he took out the letters of blood from tens of thousands of people he had collected. Raising them above his head, he said, I am willing to enter the garden to debate with you. Gauda glanced at him expressionlessly. Carrying the gray-clothed man, he walked into the garden. Fang Tingsher felt slightly uneasy. Summoning up his courage, he walked in. At the same time, he dissuaded his fellow students' requests to enter together. Fan Xian sat in the grand wooden armchair with his eyes half closed, enjoying Cece's gentle massage behind him. His fingers tapped on the table along with the singing of the melodious master in the pavilion in the garden. Below him, the incomparably daring Fang Tingsher, who had entered the garden alone to ask for justice from the imperial envoy, was flipping through something. His face alternated between green and white. His lips trembled slightly. It was as if he was shocked by what was recorded on it. Fan Xian slowly opened his eyes and said, This is a court secret. However, there are many things that are not convenient to bring to the Suzhou government as evidence. There are many things that are already dead and cannot be used as evidence. There are many things that involve nobles and court. I cannot use them as a cover to openly destroy the Ming Garden. However, since you have the courage to pull together a group of students to seek justice, presumably you are not an idiot. After seeing so many things, you should have your own independent judgment as to what exactly happened in the Ming Garden matter. What Fang Tingsher held in his hands were the results of the Overwatch Council's secret investigation of the Ming Garden this half-year. It included the pirates on the East Sea Island, the strange death of Ming Lansher's concubine, the story of Xia Qifei and the Ming family smuggling to Dongyi, and the ace Sigu Jian left to enter Jiangnan to assassinate Fan Xian. Each stroke was recorded clearly. Although, as Fan Xian had said, these records could not be presented as evidence because of the lack of circumstantial evidence, Fang Tingshi knew that what was written on it was all true. His hands holding the files were trembling. But, it shouldn't be like this. The old Ming matriarch has softened Jiangnan and supported countless poor students. My family has been poor since I was young. If it wasn't for the Ming Garden giving me rice every month to study, how could I have entered White Deer Academy? His eyes were slightly red. He stared angrily at Fan Xian and said, Imperial Envoy, since I dared to enter the garden today, I did not have any thoughts of leaving alive. I do not believe the things recorded here. The Overwatch Council is best at framing people. Fan Xian looked at him coldly and did not continue. Fang Tingshi himself could not continue. Ever since I took over the Overwatch Council, when has there been a case of framing people and framing people? Fan Xian said mockingly. As for you, as a student, you should have the ability to make independent judgments. You don't need to rely on other people's words or your own eyes. You only need to look at the situation these years in your own brain. Of course, you all have no brains to begin with, Fan Xian scolded. If you all had brains, you wouldn't have been persuaded by others to come to Hua Garden. Where is this? This is the Imperial Envoy's residence. This is the Prince's temporary Imperial residence. Even if I cut off 300 of your heads, there would be no problem. In the end, it will be you all who die, and my reputation will also be gone. It will be good for those shady and illegal merchants who bend the law. He was angry and unkind. Pointing at Fang Tingshi's nose, he scolded, You are all a bunch of idiots. I don't know where all your years of studying went. His anger was faked because Fan Xian knew that these students would fall for it the most. As expected, Fang Tingshi mumbled, The Imperial Envoy's teaching is correct. He changed his mind. Not only had the Imperial Envoy not taken action to suppress the students, but he had also invited him into the manor. His heart was indeed sincere. He opened his mouth with a pained smile and said, Sir is magnanimous. Fan Xian closed his eyes and shook his head. My magnanimity cannot be said to be magnanimous. It is just that you are all still young. I am not willing to use those methods, as to why I can tolerate you today. He suddenly opened his eyes and said, You should know who the 4 disciples of Fan Xian's are. Fan Xian's 4 disciples, Ho Jichang, Qing Jialin, Shi Chanli, and Yang Wanli, were all Fan Xian students who had jumped up after the spring examination case. Fang Tingshi nodded. Fan Xian smiled. My 4 students are all older than me, but they all call me teacher. Back in the day, Jichang had also caused trouble in Jiangnan just like you are today. Fang Tingshi was slightly startled. Fan Xian finally said, It is not that I value talent. Perhaps I am nostalgic looking at you. After Fang Tingshi left, Cici furrowed her brows and said, Young master, these people don't know what's good for them. Why are you still so polite? Fan Xian shook his head. Reputation is indeed not important, but I still have to be careful about the students. In the future, after these people pass the provincial examinations, they will all enter the court as officials. Even if I don't think for myself, I still have to think for the prince. Cici then said, Then let this matter end here. A warm smile rose to the corners of Fan Xian's lips. If Fang Tingshi can persuade the students to go back, it means he has the ability. In the future, of course, we have to train him well. As for the ghosts mixed in the crowd, they are the ones I am waiting for. Ming Qingda had long sent someone to send a message. The internal structure of Ming Garden had pretty much been suppressed. The problem was, it was not easy to suppress the rumors in Suzhou at the moment, particularly the troublemaking crowd. There were certainly people with ulterior motives. Don't use knives. Fan Xian turned around and gave orders to Gauda. The wooden sticks I had you prepare a few days ago are more useful. As for suppressing things, you have to hit them painfully, but you can't let them bleed. No matter what matter it was, adding the word bleed in front of it was always troublesome. After Fang Tingshi left the garden, he gathered with the students and spoke for a long time. Unfortunately, he was unable to convince everyone. On the contrary, some of the students suspected that he was afraid of the power of the court. There were also some sarcastic words in the crowd that provoked him. After Fang Tingshi's anger, he was ashamed. For a moment he didn't know what to do. He could only take his friends and leave Ming Garden first. Only half of the people who had surrounded Ming Garden to express their anger remained. The officials of the governor's manor watched even more closely after the dog blood bag incident earlier. After an indeterminable amount of time, a large group of people suddenly charged out of Hua Garden with wooden sticks in their hands. They struck down on the bodies of the students who had surrounded and refused to leave. For a moment, wretched cries rang out and the sound of sticks hitting flesh rang out. Although the people of the Overwatch Council did not strike too heavily and the students were not heavily injured, the students, who had immersed themselves in scriptures every day, had never experienced this kind of stick education. They cried and yelled before they were chased away by the sticks. In front of Hua Garden, peace immediately returned. Only the rain slowly floated down. The commander of the governor's manor stared dumbstruck at this scene. He thought to himself that the imperial envoy was truly vicious and merciless. No one noticed that, following the scattered students, there were also some furtive figures. Behind these figures, there were also secret agents of the Overwatch Council disguised as scholars or commoners. As they ran in panic, they kept a careful eye on them. Fan Xian stepped on the ladder and held the third prince's hand as they climbed to the top of Hua Garden's wall. Looking at this scene, he couldn't resist laughing and said, "According to the standard pattern, today we should have some gang members disguised as people with lofty ideals who are loyal to the emperor and love the people to beat up these students." The third prince asked curiously, "Sir, why didn't you do this today?" Fan Xian laughingly scolded, "You want to use the Jiangnan water bandits? Now everyone knows that Xia Qifei is one of us. What need is there for that extra face? I'm still sick." To be continued. If you want to know what happens next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 400. So high-spirited. Fan Xian had one foot on the railing of the top floor of the Suzhou branch of Baoyue brothel. He held a fan in his other hand and fanned himself. The cold rain at the end of spring had stopped. The summer heat had gone and returned. In an instant, the temperature in the air rose. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the funeral procession passing through the main street. He listened to the babbling of morning music and couldn't resist smiling. Ming Qingda indeed had a way. On the surface, he appeared mournful, angry, and absolutely irreconcilable with Fan Xian. He had actually allowed the old Ming matriarch's burial ceremony to pass through the city. It was very ostentatious along the way. Along the way, there were citizens who had set up small tables and placed fruits in worship. There were also some beggars who had received benefits who were kowtowing to the slowly moving coffin. The sound of morning music was actually sometimes pleasant to listen to, at least in Fan Xian's ears. He waved his fan and couldn't resist sighing again, so high-spirited. The wind blew through the fan. He couldn't be bothered to fight with Ming Garden over their pride. He did not find it exciting to use a dead person to obstruct his eyes. If they wanted to parade, then go ahead. In any case, it wouldn't do him any real harm. After sweeping away the sixth Ming disciple and the old matriarch's trusted aides, Ming Qingda had already gradually and steadily controlled the situation in Ming Garden. It was also under his powerful suppression that the tens of thousands of Ming family members did not let out a final roar of mutual destruction because of the old Ming matriarch's unusual death. The scholars who had been clamoring in Suzhou a few days ago had been split apart by Fan Xian and then educated with a rod. Without the support of the Ming family, their momentum immediately weakened. Just as Fan Xian had expected, the so-called righteous indignation could not last long. Of course, Fan Xian knew that if he wanted to suppress the voices of revenge within the Ming family, it would certainly be hard on Ming Qingda. However, this matter had been caused by Ming Qingda. If he didn't want Fan Xian to fly into a rage, he had to swallow all this hard work, difficulty, and anger. What truly made Fan Xian happy was that the crows scattered among the crowd a few days ago had already sent back news. He didn't know if it was because of the Ming family's sudden silence that the elders of the Juanshan conference had no time to react. At least in the Jiangnan area, some of the officials of the Juanshan conference had made some rather stupid responses, such as inciting the citizens to cause trouble. Relying on the Overwatch Council's secret investigation in this matter and the people Ming Qingda had secretly sold to Hua Garden, the Overwatch Council had already set their sights on a manor downstream of the Yangtze River. It was a stronghold the Juanshan conference had set up in Jiangnan. Perhaps it was just an unremarkable manor and was not very important to the Juanshan conference, but Fan Xian needed to get rid of it to express his stance. While he was in Jiangnan, your Juanshan conference had better behave for the time being. If you don't behave, I'll shut you up. The Black Knights could not enter Ming Garden because the Emperor did not like to see the Overwatch Council's martial power overly involved in local government affairs. However, for such a mysterious organization as the Juanshan Conference that even faintly resisted imperial power, the Qing emperor probably did not care what methods Fan Xian used. Governor Shui Qing of Jiangnan Road also did not oppose Fan Xian's plan. After all, there was not enough time to ask Jingdo. Today was the day the old Ming matriarch was being buried. It was also the day the 500 Black Knights stealthily crossed the Yangtze River to wash a certain place in blood. The funeral procession had already passed through the long street under the Baoyue brothel. Fan Xian noticed that a few nobles had already carefully backed out of the procession. These Jiangnan people did not want to offend the Ming family, but they also did not want to give the imperial envoy too much face. Thus, they sent the procession to the city gates and turned back on their own. So high-spirited and vigorous, with great power in hand, what need was there to fear the hearts of the people? Although Fan Xian did not get carried away, he had begun to feel in the depths of his heart that power was truly like a drug. No wonder Shizha had a saying, Xiaolong had paraphrased it, and it was commonly seen on the forums. Absolute so-and-so brought absolute so-and-so. However, Fan Xian knew that he did not need to be corrupt. He thought without shame that his mental realm was still relatively high, so he couldn't resist sighing for the third time. In the story there should be someone asking, Sir, why? It was a pity that Wang Qinian still had another half a year before he could return to the Qing kingdom. Beside him, Deng Ziyu deliberated for a long time with a strange expression before choking out, Sir. Seems to be in a good mood. Fan Xian smiled and spat. Of course I'm in a good mood. This old woman died cleanly. Standing on a tall building and watching others enter the grave, how could I not be happy? Deng Ziyu thought to himself, what was there to be happy about? He couldn't resist opening his mouth to admonish, Jiangnan people? He only said 3 words before Fan Xian stopped him and smiled coldly. Don't repeat those words. What people's hearts and public opinion? In a few months these people will completely forget. What benevolence, what benefits they can only remember for a few days. In the end, it cannot compare to the fact that there is no oil to cook at home, no rice to cook at home. These things are important. Common people are the most forgetful people in the world. His words had a point, and it was pointing to Fan Xian's past, the Yi family that had long been weathered by wind and rain and turned into the palace treasury of the royal court. Back then, compared to the Ming family of today, the Yi family was 10 times more glorious, 10 times more powerful, and 10 times more benevolent toward the people. Heaven changed its face in one day and the family was broken and people died. The tens of thousands of people under heaven all kept quiet out of fear. Who dared to seek justice for the Yi family? Deng Ziyu was startled and silent. He knew he had touched on the commissioner's years of pain, so he didn't say anything more. He finally understood why the commissioner would always smile coldly and not care about the people's hearts each time he mentioned them. As officials, we are only the emperor's officials, not the people's officials. Fan Xian's words were the complete opposite of serving the people. With the situation having reached this point, what was there for Fan Xian to be dissatisfied with? The Ming family was the monkey in the palm of his hand. Jiangnan was certain. Xia Qifei had already sent back news from Jiangbei. A few days ago he had hooked up with his second brother's side. The storm in the Ministry of Revenue in the capital had settled. There was an urgent need to gather herbs in Hangzhou. The 3 large workshops in the palace treasury were in full swing. Under the gaze of the Qingyu Hall shopkeeper, they were serious and lively. As for officialdom, Fan Xian's relationship with Shui Qing was growing closer and closer. In the palace, the emperor's trust in him had not decreased. Particularly after the Ming family matter, Fan Xian had damaged his own reputation. Without question, it increased the emperor's pity for his illegitimate child who was willing to be alone. Looking left and right, it was all a situation of great victory for him. As for the Juanshan conference, a cold smile flashed across the corner of Fan Xian's lips. He didn't know what the old cripple in Qin Garden outside the capital was thinking. In any case, Fan Xian did not plan on delving too deeply into this matter. The so-called raising a tiger was like this. To completely wipe out the Juanshan conference, first of all, this was a very difficult task. Even if Fan Xian went wild and risked losing most of the power in his hands, he still might not be able to accomplish this. Just looking at how the incomparably powerful second priest of the Qing temple, Great Master Sanshi, was only a pawn thrown out by the Juanshan conference, one could imagine how much terrifying power was hidden in this nominally loose organization. Even if, with the help of his father and the old cripple, the whole family put their lives on the line and successfully overturned the Juanshan conference, Jiangnan would be settled, and the monarch's power was stable. The emperor would not allow Fan Xian to lead troops into battle. Then what else could Fan Xian do? At such a young age, would he stay in that dark and gloomy room in the Overwatch Council and retire? Fan Xian did not want to become a second Chen Pingping, so he would not rush to resolve and extinguish certain conflicts. On the contrary, he hoped that these conflicts would slowly blossom in a situation he could control, like a poisonous flower. Of course, he did not think that today in the Baoyu brothel, his thoughts and the old cripple's thoughts were actually the same. The old and the young were both working hard in secret for a goal that could not be announced. The only regret was that these two people did not seem to be willing to communicate with each other. Perhaps, they did not want to implicate each other? Not delving into the Juanshan conference did not mean they wouldn't deal with it. The Juanshan conference had tricked Fan Xian a few times in Jiangnan. He had to settle this debt. At this moment, the Black Knights were advancing silently on the mountain path. After a few months of planning, the only small hole was the Juanshan conference accountant, Mr. Zhou. This person had not been silenced. Furthermore, under the surveillance of both Ming Qingda and himself, he was still able to escape without a sound. This meant that this person was certainly an important character in the Juanshan conference. Perhaps he knew the true inside story of the Juanshan conference. However, Haitang still had not returned. A faint worry rose between Fan Xian's brows. Mr. Zhou must be under the protection of a very powerful figure. He left the railing and sat back down at the table. He ordered Deng Ziyu, contact the governor's manor and send out a wanted poster. His voice was very low. The Ming family has already sent someone to deliver housekeeper Zhou's portrait. Give it to the governor's manor and have both sides investigate together. Deng Ziyu shivered. He knew that Sir Zhou did not have any good ideas, so he could only begin to use the power of the government to try and force them in the open. As for that portrait, he knew that it was drawn by the old Ming matriarch's personal serving girl. Fan Xian sighed and said, "If we can capture that Mr. Zhou alive, don't you think this matter would be a bit too wonderful? It is indeed a wonderful thought." The top floor of Baoyue brothel was empty. Only Fan Xian's table had people sitting at it. At this moment, on the other side of the railing at that table, two more people suddenly appeared. Furthermore, they followed up Fan Xian's words with extreme coldness. Countless sounds of metal being unsheathed rang out in the top floor. It was very severe. With Gao Dao in the lead, the 7 tiger guards gripped their strangely shaped long knives tightly in their hands and formed the shape of a mountain, firmly protecting Fan Xian behind them. At the same time, a dozen swordsmen of the 6th Bureau of the Overwatch Council surged out from the side of the building. Their long swords had not been drawn. In their hands they had already raised crossbows painted black and did not reflect much light. They were extremely sinister and aimed at the two people at the table. There was originally no one in the building, yet two people had appeared without a sound. Their arrival had not only been hidden from the swordsmen of the 6th Bureau of the Overwatch Council, but also from the Tiger Guards and Fan Xian, whose internal injuries had long healed. What kind of realm was this? However, Fan Xian's defensive power reacted quickly. In an instant he had separated the two people. A dozen crossbows in addition to the 7 Tiger Guards who could fight head-on against Haitang Duo, and Fan Xian who had long advanced to the 9th level, even if the newcomers were Yun Jilan of Dongyi or Sir Lang Tiao of Northern Qi, everyone had the confidence that they could easily take them down. However, the two people did not have any strange expressions in the face of such a situation. The smile on one of their faces was still a bit forced. The other figure wearing a straw hat only exuded a coldness from head to toe. It was a coldness that saw everyone as nothing. The person wearing the straw hat slowly raised his head and revealed a strange face. There was not a trace of expression on his face. However, his eyes looked at the people in the building as coldly as if he was looking at a group of dead people. "You want Mr. Zhou? This is Mr. Zhou." Surrounded by crossbows, the person was as at ease as a spring breeze. A natural domineering aura rose from the air. Separated by everyone, he looked coldly at Fan Xian. "But I won't give it to you." Fan Xian looked at the person through the clothes of the Tiger Guards. His heart jumped. Calmly he said, "So, it is you who is protecting Mr. Zhou. No wonder Haitang has never succeeded. Since you are not willing to give him to me, then why have you come to see me? I don't have the habit of chatting with uninvited guests." The person coldly said, "A deal. Pull back the Black Knights and I will spare your life." Spare your life? Under such circumstances he was saying he would spare Fan Xian's life? Unless he was an idiot, only then would he have such confidence. However, Fan Xian knew that the other person was not an idiot, so he had to have the ability to kill him under such circumstances. Fan Xian instead smiled and asked, How is Haitang? The person suddenly rolled his eyes strangely. I rarely kill women. Fan Xian smiled slightly and said, that's good, release. Very abruptly and without warning the word release was spoken. The swordsmen of the 6th Bureau of the Overwatch Council loosened the springs in their hands. The 30 poison crossbow bolts split into 3 batches and shot toward the table like a dense rain of death. What, Mr. Zhou? What Juanshan conference? He didn't have time to worry about it. As long as he could kill the person in front of him, Fan Xian felt that anything was worth it. High-spirited? A bitter smile appeared at the corner of his lips. To be continued. If you want to know what happened next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 401. Separated by less than 10 feet, the speed of the 30 poison crossbow bolts was terrifying. The power attached to them was also shocking. No one could imagine that someone could dodge such a concentrated and sudden attack. Even if the person sitting at the table was a god, he would not be able to dodge. Thus he did not dodge at all. Without seeing how he moved, a pair of chopsticks disappeared from the bamboo container on the table. He caught this pair of chopsticks firmly in his hands and then waved them freely in the air. It was as if he was catching a few delicacies from nothingness to eat. The tips of the weak bamboo chopsticks whistled through the air. It was as if it was not a pair of chopsticks but an ancient divine weapon imbued with endless jinchi. Ding 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 ding. It was like rain hitting a banana leaf. A series of densely packed sounds rang out. All of the crossbow bolts in the process of quickly shooting were gently pinched and pulled by the pair of chopsticks. In an impossible situation, all of them were pulled off by a few strands. They deviated from the imagined shooting trajectory by a few strands. They brushed past the bodies of the 2 people by the table and shot into the wooden boards of the Baoyue brothel, into the walls of the carriage. The crossbow bolts shot into the wood. Only the tails of the bolts trembled slightly. In an instant, the 30 crossbow bolts made it seem as if wild grass had grown on the floor, but they could not harm the person at all. The swordsmen of the 6th Bureau of the Overwatch Council looked at the scene in front of them and felt a chill surge into their hearts and take over their entire bodies. To be able to use only a pair of chopsticks to pull out such a fast crossbow bolt at such a short distance, this kind of speed, this kind of vision, this kind of power, this kind of... The other party was not human. The other party was certainly not human. The Overwatch Council was the strongest organization in the Qing court. The officials of the Overwatch Council were the most determined people in the Qing kingdom. But, in the end, they were still human. When they discovered that the enemy they faced seemed to have left the realm of human, they still felt fear and a kind of helplessness. The crossbow bolts of the 3rd Bureau only fired 3 times in a row. It was already too late to reload. Furthermore, the hands of all the swordsmen of the 6th Bureau were trembling. They looked incredulously at the table and the person beside it. It was as if they had forgotten their next step. As the group of crossbow bolts flew over, the 7 tiger guards were like 7 fierce tigers coming down the mountain. Under the cover of the crossbow bolts, they held long knives in their hands and turned into 7 streaks of snow-white light as they chopped toward the table. The light of the knife was still in the air when Fan Xian, who was behind the tiger guards, shouted, "Retreat!" With this shout, he stood up and leaped into the air. With the order to retreat, the other 6 tiger guards, with the exception of Gao Da, forcefully reversed their jinchi. In the air, they held their sabers horizontally across their chests in an extremely awkward manner. 4 feet above the table, they forcefully steadied their bodies. With the tip of their toes, they retreated as ordered. Gao Da's kung fu was the strongest, and his reaction was the fastest. As the sharp edge of the mountain, he had already reached the table. Facing the mysterious person wearing the bamboo hat, he felt a slight chill in his heart, but he could no longer retreat. He could only let out a roar and circulate the jinchi in his body to its peak. He crossed his hands and slashed down with his saber. Gao Da suddenly felt something tighten around his ankle, and his body was being pulled back by a vast amount of jinchi. However, the saber had already slashed down. The light of the knife sliced across the table. Because it was being dragged by the person behind him, it didn't cut the man in the bamboo hat. Instead, it cut the floor in front of the table. With a sharp sound, the thick solid wood floor was like thin paper. A large hole was cut open by the long knife in Gao Da's hand. Dust rose slightly and wood splinters flew everywhere. Through the hole, one could see the table on the 2nd floor of the Baoyue brothel. Just as Gao Da struck, the man in the bamboo hat gently placed the pair of chopsticks in his hands on the table. It was only then that everyone noticed there was a sword beside the leg of the table. It was a very plain sword that did not give off a sharp light. It was wrapped in a thick coarse cloth. Then the pair of chopsticks landed on the table. The ordinary sword suddenly gave off a bright light. With a clang, the hilt of the sword trembled without any wind. It jumped up excitedly and tore through the coarse cloth binding the scabbard. It forcefully pulled out half of the snow-white blade. A cold, murderous sword intent that did not seem to belong to the mortal world seeped out through that half of the sword. The sword intent entered the floorboards. The moment Gao Da's long knife touched the floorboards, it passed over. At the same time the long knife broke open the large hole in the floorboards, countless fine lines appeared along the knife's opening and quickly spread through it. There was no pattern to the lines, but they appeared so beautiful. There was not a shred of vitality in them. The patterns quickly invaded Gao Da's long saber. The tiger guard's long saber began to tremble uncontrollably. It was as though a pair of invisible hands were holding a diamond and carving it on the sharp and solid surface of the saber. Countless deep marks appeared on the surface of the saber. Gao Da's hands also began to tremble. Shocked and helpless, he pulled back his knife. The long knife blade split open like a weathered stone surface. The terrifying sword intent only reached the hilt of the knife, but the ripple went up. Gao Da gave a muffled grunt. His chest felt heavy and he spat out a mouthful of blood. At the same time there was a crack sound in his right wrist. The joint had been broken. It was only a matter of 3 breaths. For the man in the bamboo hat, the crossbow bolts and 7 tiger guard knives were as simple as raising and putting down a pair of chopsticks. The moment they met, the Overwatch Council suffered a crushing defeat. At this moment, the people protecting Fan Xian knew that what he had said earlier was not empty words. Given this extraordinary and divine realm, if the man in the bamboo hat wanted to kill the imperial envoy, even if they all died, they would not be able to stop him. Extraordinary and divine. Other than the 4 great grandmasters, who else in the world had such a realm? Blood seeped out of the corner of Gao Da's mouth. His eyes were filled with shock. Half kneeling on the ground, he stared at the man in the bamboo hat not far away and said each word clearly, Sigu Jian. As an internal servant of the Qing court, when had the tiger guards ever feared anyone? Gao Da's 3 words were said so weakly and hopelessly. In the hearts of the people, the 4 great grandmasters were no longer in the category of normal humans. All of the legends had almost become fairy tales. The feelings people had toward the 4 great grandmasters were only respect. Respect and fear. Other than that there was nothing else. No one dared to attack the 4 great grandmasters. Even if it was someone who wanted to commit suicide, no one would choose this path. Gao Da stared at the man in the bamboo hat with wide eyes. He didn't understand why Sigu Jian, who should be far away in Dongyi, would come to Jiangnan. It was only then that he felt his ankle being gently released. Earlier, if that person had not used a powerful force to grab his ankle and pull him back, Gao Da's knife would have chopped down and the man in the bamboo hat sword intent rippled out. At this moment, what would have been shredded like cloth would not only be the long knife but also his body. Only now did Gao Da feel a boundless fear. Unconsciously, he turned his head to look and saw Fan Xian's trembling right hand gently wiping it on his long robe. Fan Xian's hand was completely covered in cold sweat. It was a wet mess. He knew that if he had not seen the opportunity quickly and shouted quickly, these 7 tiger guards would have all died at the hands of the man in the bamboo hat. However, his expression remained calm. Although his pupils constricted slightly and his right hand, hidden behind his back, trembled slowly, he remained calm. Facing such an extraordinary and divine warrior, he had to be calm. The other party was a great grandmaster. Fan Xian was not an ordinary person. Ever since he was young, he had lived with a great grandmaster who was not ranked among the great grandmasters. He had been taught by Uncle Wuxia hand in hand. Thus, facing the man in the bamboo hat, he was not like everyone else in the building, so shocked that they couldn't even speak. However, he was still shocked. He even began to feel a bitterness in his mouth. Wuxia had once talked about power. Without a sliver of Jinqi, Wuxia had extraordinary power, but he was, after all, Fan Xian's closest family. When Fan Xian faced a great grandmaster for the first time today, he realized that under the other party's power, he didn't even have a sliver of a chance to retaliate. Fan Xian was a meticulous person who knew himself and others. He knew that given his 9th level strength, even 10 of him could not defeat Uncle Wuxia. Using the same logic, 10 of him could not defeat the old man wearing the bamboo hat. What he had seen and felt earlier made Fan Xian believe even more in what Uncle Wuxia had once said. A 1st level can kill a 9th level as long as one's luck is good enough. But if you are facing those guys, don't talk about luck. The martial artists of the world were ranked from low to high, and those who reached the 9th level were the most powerful. The difference between each level was not insurmountable. Otherwise, Fan Xian would not have been able to slaughter everyone on Yolan Street, and he would not have been able to toy with Lang Qiao and Friar He in Shangjing, Northern Qi. Once one broke past the 9th level and entered the realm of the Celestial like Ku He, that Baldy, or the old man in front of him, it was already a completely different realm. The difference in strength was like a bottomless ravine. It was impossible for any scheme to fill it. The top floor of Baoyue brothel was completely silent, but the noise below had already begun. Although Gao Da's strike had struck the air, it had startled countless people. The noise was unbearable. After a short pause, it quieted down. The guards and Shi Sang guarding downstairs were probably taking care of it. The man in the bamboo hat by the table was still silent. It was as if he was waiting for Fan Xian to make a decision. There was no light on his body, but in everyone's eyes, his thin clothes seemed to be plated with the splendor of the sky, making it hard for people to look directly at him. In comparison, Mr. Zhou, whom Fan Xian had always wanted to capture, sat timidly by the man in the bamboo hat. No one would notice him. A simple person, yet he covered up all the splendor between heaven and earth. Fan Xian's left hand still held the fan tightly. He looked at the man in the bamboo hat by the table and didn't speak for a moment. The top floor of Baoyue brothel was completely silent. It was deathly silent. The atmosphere was oppressive. The man in the bamboo hat looked at the calm Fan Xian and smiled slightly. Your reaction, your strength, seems to be a bit stronger than the rumors say. This was referring to when Gao Da's strike had come down. Fan Xian had reacted quickly and called back the 6 people. In a flash, he had shot up and used the coffin breaker to expand his right arm. He then used a small trick to forcefully grab Gao Da's ankle and drag Gao Da back, saving his life. For Fan Xian to be able to do all this in such a short moment could already be considered perfect. It was so much so that the man in the bamboo hat revealed a glimmer of admiration. Fan Xian did not reply to this question. Contrary to everyone's expectations, he slowly walked to the side of the railing and didn't look at the man in the bamboo hat again. All of the guards, including Gao Da, were stunned. The commissioner was very daring. Facing a great grandmaster that tens of thousands of people revered, he could be so natural and not look at him. Fan Xian walked to the side of the railing and faced the bustling Suzhou. The sparse air above Suzhou and the lingering smell of firecrackers lingered in the air. He took a deep breath. His expression changed slightly and immediately returned to normal. No one knew what he was thinking about. The sound of footsteps came from the stairs. Shi Chanli, whose face was full of shock, and Sang Wen, who had her mouth wide open and revealed worry in her gentleness, glanced at the table surrounded by the people of the Overwatch Council. They immediately turned their questioning gazes toward Fan Xian by the railing. Everyone go down? Fan Xian leaned against the railing and didn't turn his head as he gave the order in a cold voice. His hand gripped the fan tighter and tighter. The paper of the fan had warped slightly. He had probably made up his mind. Earlier, when the Tiger Guards had attacked, Fan Xian's shout had been able to make everyone retreat without regard for their lives. From this, it could be seen that none of the guards had any objections to his orders. They had carried them out very thoroughly. Now, when he gave the order for everyone to go down, everyone, including the Tiger Guards, used silence to express their opposition. A great grandmaster wanted to kill someone. At a time like this, no one dared to leave Fan Xian alone in the building. Fan Xian turned around and gazed at Gao Da with a slight smile. Perhaps my orders are no longer effective? Gao Da's heart skipped a beat. Looking at the familiar warm smile on the commissioner's face and the encouragement in it, his mind was a mess for a moment. He understood Fan Xian. Every time Fan Xian revealed that mesmerizing smile, it was often when he was truly angry. It was also when he had a card up his sleeve. Fan Xian continued, "Without my orders, no one is allowed to take one step into this building. Also, immediately evacuate the neighboring streets to prevent accidental injuries." Gao Da let out a murky breath and wiped away the blood at the side of his lips. With a muffled grunt, he led everyone down the stairs. Along the way, he also pushed down Shi Chanli, who was standing at the top of the stairs and unwilling to go down. When Fan Xian's personal guards came down the stairs, they saw a scene that they would remember deeply. It was a scene that made them incomparably terrified at the time. Step by step, Fan Xian slowly walked toward the table. He wore that strange smile on his face as the deformed fan in his hand opened again. As he fanned himself, he walked toward the table. His walk was very steady and free. In reality, walking from that table to this table was only a distance of 10 steps. However, these 10 steps made Fan Xian feel as if he had walked through the gates of hell. Strangely, the closer he got to the table the man in the bamboo hat was at, the calmer Fan Xian's heart became. Walking to the side of the table, Fan Xian stared into the eyes of the man in the bamboo hat. He looked directly at him rudely as if he was not at all afraid that the man could kill him with a casual raise of his hand. The man in the bamboo hat also seemed to feel that the Jiangnan Road Imperial envoy was rather daring and looked back at him with a slight smile. Gauda went down the stairs and immediately rearranged the defenses. At the same time, he followed the commissioner's orders and evacuated the neighboring citizens. He also ordered his subordinates to quickly go to the governor's manor to mobilize troops. Although he knew these methods had no effect on the powerful warrior in the building, he had done his best. Then he went to the top floor of a building adjacent to Baoyue brothel and flipped onto the eaves. Carefully hiding his figure, he watched every movement in Baoyue brothel across the street. He was prepared to gamble his life at any moment. Gauda crouched behind the tile beast and looked at the top floor of Baoyue brothel. He couldn't hear what the people inside were saying, but just looking at the contents was enough to shock him. The building was empty. There was only Fan Xian and the man in the bamboo hat facing each other. One was sitting by the table and the other was standing by the table. As for Mr. Zhou, although he was not a person in Fan Xian's eyes, he was still an eyesore, so he waved his hand and indicated for Mr. Zhou to scram to the side. In reality, the Juanshan Conference's accountant, Mr. Zhou, was already quite frightened. He immediately left his seat obediently and squatted in the corner of the railing. There was an empty chair. Thus, Fan Xian lifted the front of his robe and sat down without a care in the world. At this moment, he was less than half a body's distance from the man in the bamboo hat. It was intimate, dangerous, and terrifying to the extreme. Gauda, who was watching from a distance, was almost scared to death. Fan Xian, who was in the building, still wore a faint smile. He put away the deformed paper fan in his left hand and slowly picked up the chopsticks the man in the bamboo hat had slammed on the table. He inserted them back into the bamboo tube. He did these 3 actions very carefully, slowly and carefully. After the chopsticks were inserted, he sighed happily and clapped his hands as if he had completed a great task. The man in the bamboo hat did not kill him. This meant that everything could be discussed. Courageous. The man in the bamboo hat looked at Fan Xian with a slight smile. Among the younger generation, you are the most outstanding. If the great Grandmaster's words got out, it would certainly establish Fan Xian's unbreakable position. However, Fan Xian did not feel slightly gratified because of these words. He smiled warmly and said, "So what? If you want to kill me, isn't it a matter of time?" The man in the bamboo hat calmly said, "What I said earlier still stands. You pull back the Black Knights and I won't kill you." Fan Xian suddenly raised his head. A glimmer of mockery and disdain appeared in his eyes. In this world, it had been many years since someone dared to use this kind of gaze to look at the man in the bamboo hat. Even though the man in the bamboo hat was a top figure in the world, he still couldn't help but feel a glimmer of anger. "This is your request? A proper great grandmaster has fallen to such a level? You don't need this old face, but the Qin court still needs face." Fan Xian suddenly opened his mouth. Once he opened his mouth, countless sharp words spouted out. It was as if the person in front of him was not an unfathomable great grandmaster but a subordinate he had pulled by the ear and lectured in the Overwatch Council. The man in the bamboo hat froze. It was clear that no one had lectured him like this before. For a moment he couldn't react. Fan Xian suddenly slammed the table and stared at the man in the bamboo hat's strange face. Enunciating each word, he said, "Have you gone senile? This is a matter of the Juanshan Conference. What does it have to do with you that I move the Black Knights to kill people? Do you have any filial sons or grandsons in the manor? You just charged up like this and put a knife to my neck and I have to listen to you? Even if I did listen to you, what would happen in the future? Would your filial sons and grandsons not die? I'm afraid they will die even faster." Fan Xian's voice became sharp and mixed with boundless disdain and mockery. Pointing at the man in the bamboo hat's nose, he scolded, "Please wake up. What year and year is it now? It has long since ceased to be the age where you can walk unhindered with a sword. Who do you think you are? Do you think you are a sword immortal? Isn't it a goddamn road to death?" The man in the bamboo hat looked at Fan Xian like he was looking at an idiot. Suddenly he felt that he was also an idiot. He traveled the world and received the respect of tens of thousands of people. Even the ruler of a country looked at him with respect. He couldn't even find someone who was disrespectful to him, much less someone like this beautiful young man in front of him who pointed at his nose and scolded him. However, he was, after all, a great grandmaster. After a moment of shock, he recovered his calm. On the contrary, he looked at Fan Xian and chuckled. His laughter was very joyous. How many years has it been since someone has dared to speak to me like this? As he spoke, the man in the bamboo hat's tone became heavy and he coldly said, I will count to 3. If you don't give the order to retreat, I can only kill you. That pair of steady hands slowly rested on the table. Fan Xian's gaze lowered slightly. He looked at the pair of hands that should have been old but didn't have a single wrinkle. The sword under the table was pulled by a powerful aura and gave off the cry of a dragon. Amidst the buzzing sound, the hilt of the sword slowly rose. The half of the snow-white sword body illuminated the entire building. 3. The man in the bamboo hat began to count down coldly. Fan Xian narrowed his eyes and glanced at him. Straightforwardly he said, 1. After saying this, he smashed his fist down beside him. This punch was mixed with his nearly 20 years of day and night meditation and the tyrannical zhenqi of the nameless martial secret. It was mixed with the Yi family's coffin breaker technique and the supreme heart of Tianyi Dao he had learned from Haitang. The qi flowed at will. In an instant, the will broke through tens of thousands of barriers. The killing came out of the meridians and moved to the body of the fist. It smashed down viciously. The fist smashed onto the hilt of the sword. The air in the building rippled without reason. The air outside the railing seemed to tremble, making the scenery outside change shape slightly. With a clang, the normal sword was smashed back by Fan Xian's fist. The dragon's cry immediately disappeared. By the railing, Mr. Zhou had long fainted from this shocking shock and fell wretchedly to the side of the railing. Fan Xian swallowed back the mouthful of fresh blood that had rushed up from his chest and stared fiercely and stubbornly into the eyes of the man in the bamboo hat. Suddenly, he opened his mouth and shouted, Deng Ziyu, listen to my order. This shout carried zhenqi and spread out. In an instant, it spread through the entire Chang Street. Gouda, who was hiding across the street, was startled and unconsciously stood up. Deng Ziyu, who had been standing guard in the middle of the street, didn't know what had happened. He replied in a trembling voice, I am here. Fan Xian continued to stare into the man's eyes and said viciously, Send out the signal. The Black Knights are to enter the garden. If they resist, kill without mercy. Kill without mercy. After an indeterminable amount of time, the man in the bamboo hat's complicated sigh rang out in the quiet top floor of Baoyue brothel. You're right. I should not have entered the world again. However, the people you want to kill and the people you want to capture are people I care about. What about that? The man in the bamboo hat gently gripped the hilt of the sword by the table and flipped his hand to lift it. In a quiet voice he said, I will take the sword and leave Dong Mountain. The power of the sword gradually increased. It would be a lie to say that Fan Xian was not afraid. It would be even more false to say that he was not nervous. However, he used his valiant state of mind to control every muscle on his face. He stared fixedly at the man in the bamboo hat's face and said one thing. You don't dare to kill me. A moment of silence. Why wouldn't I dare to kill you? Because you are not that idiot Sigu Jian. Fan Xian gripped the broken fan on the table tightly again and said, Of the 4 great grandmasters, as long as it is not that heartless idiot Sigu Jian, no one dares to kill me. The man in the bamboo hat's hand continued to hold the hilt of the sword steadily. Fan Xian believed that as long as the man pulled out this sword, his head would certainly be separated from his body. Thus, he forcefully suppressed the glimmer of fear in the depths of his heart and said, word by word, That is why I do not understand why you would appear here. In my heart, you should be that noble man who rides half a broken boat and lightly sings to the world, free and at ease, his sleeves not stained by the drifting clouds. Not a martial man whose heart has been disturbed by matters and made such a stupid move. There was a strange light in the man's eyes. Fan Xian didn't know if his eyes were playing tricks on him, but he saw a glimmer of admiration in the man's eyes. The waves only bloom for a moment, but compared to a millennial stone, it is not much different. Sir is the same. Fan Xian stared fiercely at the man and said, If you were Yi Liyun, how would you dare to kill me? To be continued. If you want to know what happened afterwards, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 402. The first and only time Fan Xian saw Yi Liyun was when he was 12 years old. That year, he lay on the precipice with a strange light in his eyes. He gazed at the half of a lonely boat below the precipice, the tens of thousands of holes in the sand, the 2 exceptional people, and the battle between powerful warriors that disappeared with a touch. One was the great-grandmaster of the Qing kingdom, Yi Luyun, and the other was his uncle. The 12-year-old Fan Xian had just completed his tyrannical scroll, so his insight could not be considered exceptional. Thus, he only sighed in admiration at the power of the battle and did not stop to understand its essence. On the contrary, it was during these years that he would occasionally think back to that time and scene. Only then would he gradually find something beautiful, shocking, and learnable from his memories. The more he thought back, the more he admired Uncle Wu Zhu and Yi Luyun's exceptional methods. Sometimes he would even feel that the figure of Yi Luyun riding the half of a lonely boat across the ocean still floated in his mind and that ancient song still echoed in his ears. He had never thought that this great grandmaster of the Qing kingdom, a figure revered by tens of thousands of people, would be at the top of a brothel and become the person he had to face. Fan Xian was the person most afraid of death in this world, so he had once made a full understanding and analysis of the enemies he could face alone. He calculated and weighed his own strength and background. In this world, the person he feared the most should be Dongyi Sigujian. The most unfathomable should be Northern Chi's Ku He. The most troublesome were, of course, the people in the royal palace. Although Sigujian was an idiot and could kill him without a care, everyone knew that idiots did not like to go out to unfamiliar places. The unfathomable ascetic master Ku He, who liked to eat human flesh, was finally beaten down to the mundane world after his beloved Uncle Wu Zhu personally acted. A person who could be injured was not that scary. As for the people in the Qing royal palace, they were all related, so he temporarily did not have to consider them. The people Fan Xian truly feared were all great grandmaster level figures. From this, it could be seen that this person was either overly confident or somewhat arrogant. Speaking of which, given his strength and the blind uncle, he truly only had to consider these people. Of the 4 great grandmasters, only Fan Xian was not worried about Yi Luyun. On one hand, the memories of his youth were too deep. He always felt that this ancestor of the Yi family was quite a beautiful person who traveled the world all year round. He was a real person with a bright and cheerful temperament. He should not be involved in the boring struggles of the world. Secondly, the situation of the Yi family in Jingdo made Fan Xian's sharp eyes see clearly that Yi Luyun was a man of affection. Otherwise, the emperor would not have been able to maintain the balance between the two sides. The Yin fire of the Hanging Temple had burned the Yi family to the ground. Despite such a despicable method, Yi Luyun was able to endure and not return to the capital. Naturally, the happiness and safety of the Yi family and the continuation of the Yi family were more important than anything else. If Yi Luyun continued to stay in Jingdo and affect the balance of power, the emperor would not actually do anything to the Yi family. This was something that could not be announced, but it was a natural tacit understanding between the imperial power and Yi Luyun's extraordinary martial power. Thus, Fan Xian could not understand why Yi Luyun would make a move because of the Juanshan conference and would so decisively come in front of him and use his life to threaten him. If this was not stupid, then what was? Even if the Black Knights were to retreat this time, did the emperor not know of the connection between the Yi family and the Juanshan conference? Wasn't this balance still broken? If he came, then so be it. Fan Xian had accurately calculated this great grandmaster's weakness, which was why he dared to be so mocking and so rebellious in his dark and sour tone. If you were Yi Luyun, how would you dare to kill me? Fan Xian stared at the pair of eyes that were as calm as autumn water under the straw hat. It was as if he wanted to see the true purpose of this great grandmaster's sudden visit to Suzhou. In the depths of his heart, he had even prepared himself if Yi Luyun immediately asked, "Why wouldn't I dare to kill you?" He would immediately and coldly throw out the killing weapon he used to roam the Jianghu as an explanation. "If you kill me, Uncle Wu Zhu will naturally kill everyone in the Yi family." This was a simple truth. Yi Luyun would definitely believe it and would not accept it. "So, back then you hid on the cliff and peeked." Unexpectedly, Yi Luyun did not continue Fan Xian's words. He only slowly put the sword in his hand back into its sheath. Looking at his handsome face, he sighed. Fan Xian's heart jumped, but there was no expression on his face. He remained calm. "You don't understand?" Yi Luyun asked. Fan Xian truly didn't understand, so he nodded. The viciousness and confidence he had purposely pretended earlier immediately weakened a little. Yi Luyun smiled slightly and said, "If you weren't on that cliff, how could you have read those 2 lines? How could you have known that I was you? How could you have known that I knew you were him? How could you have known that I wouldn't dare to kill you?" It was very complicated. It sounded very complicated, so Fan Xian truly felt a bit dizzy. Fortunately, his enlightenment was a dozen years earlier than normal people. He had lived 2 lives, so his basic knowledge of logic was much more solid than others. He circled it around in his head a few times and finally understood Yi Luoyun's words. What Yi Luoyun wanted to express was very simple. In this world, at least now, at least in Jiangnan, there were not many people who knew him. This meaning made Fan Xian feel incomparably shocked. Were there really not many people who knew the great Grandmaster of Qing Kingdom? He unconsciously let go of the paper fan he held tightly in his hand. A glimmer of mockery rose to the corners of his lips. Don't think that you can pretend to be my uncle by pretending to be cool. Don't think that you can pretend to be cool his bald head by wearing a straw hat. Don't think that you can make others believe you are Sigu Jian by carrying a broken sword. You are Yi Luoyun. Regardless of whether or not I recognize you, in the end you are Yi Luoyun. Sigu Jian's movements were the most important thing the Overwatch Council monitored. It was impossible for Yi Luoyun to pretend to be him. This was something Fan Xian did not understand. Did Yi Luoyun really want to shed all pretense of cordiality with the emperor by doing this? He mockingly said, although Sigu Jian is indeed a bit of an idiot and has been made the scapegoat countless times by the Qing Kingdom, your act is not very particular. Who I am is not important. Yi Luoyun looked at Fan Xian coldly. I am only here to remind you that too many people have died in Jiangnan when you went down there. Fan Xian narrowed his eyes and looked at one of the 4 most powerful people in the world without shrinking back. Slowly he said, what goal in this world can be reached without people dying? What goal do you want to reach? I am an official. My responsibility is to protect the emperor's interests and not let them be harmed in the slightest. A strange light flashed through Fan Xian's eyes. He smiled slightly and said, other than this I have no other thoughts. Even if you die? No, I won't die. Yi Luoyun fell silent. A moment later he said, your mother didn't seem to be this kind of person back then. Fan Xian was not surprised that the man would mention his mother, but his face was as cold as frost. Don't use my mother to pressure me, he said coldly. And speaking of killing, I'm sure you remember that my mother was no worse than me. I'm talking about innate talent and nature. Yi Luoyun's voice suddenly sank. How can a person who likes to kill hold great power? The atmosphere in the building, which had slightly eased because of the reminiscing of the past, immediately became icy cold and tense again. When you were in Jingdo, there were those pitiful people who put in so much effort to worry about you. I won't talk about that for now. Yi Luoyun sat straight by the table. His entire person was as stubborn and unyielding as the pine tree on Dong Mountain. You went to Jiangnan. Many things happened in Jiangnan. How many people died because of your skillful hands? Fan Xian narrowed his eyes. He was incomparably angry. Lowering his voice he said, could it be that if I didn't go to Jiangnan the people in Jiangnan wouldn't have died? The bastards in the palace treasury would no longer be bastards, and the rotten rats in the Ming family would become rats? He smiled disdainfully and said, old man, earlier you said not to use my mother's name to pressure me. Now I will add another sentence. The name of righteousness has no effect on me. Yi Luoyun's expression did not change. It was impossible to tell whether he was happy or angry. He only quietly said, in the matter of killing Yuan Meng, you knocked out all the serving girls and servants in the manor. It appeared to be somewhat gentle, but these unconscious people were all captured by the Suzhou government and killed to silence them. He looked gently into Fan Xian's eyes and continued, when you left, you should have guessed that under the pressure of the Overwatch Council, those innocent people could only die. If you don't kill the innocent will die because of you. I only need to bear the responsibility I should bear. Fan Xian used the shameless words of a coach from his previous life lightly to reply, but a great shock surged in his heart. Of course, it was not because those innocent people had died because of him, although this made his heart dim slightly. This great shock came from Yi Luoyun's words. His words seemed to faintly reveal that he clearly knew the details of him entering the manor to kill people. Fan Xian stared into Yi Luoyun's eyes. He didn't know just how much this great grandmaster knew. If he knew that he had already learned the Sigu sword, then it would be terrible. This was one of Fan Xian's secrets. Once the emperor in Jingdo found out, the entire Overwatch Council would be trampled to the ground because of the Shadow and Hanging Temple matter. The other party could completely use this to threaten him. Looking at Yi Luoyun's expression, it seemed that he did not know the details. But why did Yi Luoyun not mention anything else but the unimportant Yuan Meng? A harsh light flashed through Fan Xian's eyes. He immediately recovered his calm and gave up on the thought of silencing him. Today's situation was different from the past. In the past he was the knife and the people were the meat. Today he was the one struggling for his life on the chopping block. Wanting to kill the man in the bamboo hat in front of him while Uncle Wu Zhu was recovering from his injuries was an impossible task. Thus, Fan Xian slammed the table and roared, "To accomplish great things, one must not bother with trifles. If we don't strike like lightning and let Jiangnan be like before, how many people will the Ming family kill? How many more people will those pirates kill? Will you fill in the hole in the national treasury for me?" Without waiting for Yi Luyun to reply, the tip of his disdainful finger stretched out again. Very boldly and rudely, he pointed at Yi Luyun's nose and scolded, "And that Juanshan conference? Are they cleaner than me? What kind of person are you? How can you lower yourself to do things for them? You are a great grandmaster of the court. If you don't stand on my side, what right do you have to stand on that side?" The last sentence cleverly turned and went straight for the heart. Yi Luyun furrowed his brows slightly and slowly said, "The Juanshan conference is not what you think it is. Of course I understand. You are a great grandmaster high above, but in the end you are still a person. You need to enjoy. Walk the world? Wandering the world is happy, but if you are exposed to the sun and rain, where is the feeling of being at ease? Every time you go to a province or a land, if there is someone who responds, serves and worships you, naturally you are happy. To be able to use the entire world to worship you, other than that Juanshan conference, who else can do it?" Yi Luyun looked at him with a slight smile. It was as if he had not thought that this young man would be able to so easily see through his connection to the Juanshan conference. The matter had always been this simple. Ku He was worshipped by Northern Qi, Sigu Jian was worshipped by Dongyi, and the person in the royal palace was worshipped by the Qin kingdom. But what about Yi Luyun? Walking the world without returning home, blowing in the wind on the ocean, caressing the pines on Dong Mountain, crossing rivers and lakes, all of these things needed someone to take care of and take care of. Even a great grandmaster had to eat and live in an inn, particularly someone of his status. Certainly he did not like all the conventional flattery. Would he be willing to live in a secluded garden and interact with some lonely guests hidden in the wilderness? The garden required money. Entering the mountains to visit friends also required travel expenses. Traveling around the world was actually the most extravagant kind of life. You couldn't have a great grandmaster become a bandit and road tyrant. Fan Xian had not finished speaking when he smiled coldly and said, "But the relationship between your filial son and the Juanshan conference is not so simple. If you want to fish people out from under my hands, it is not so simple. The Juanshan conference is protecting these womanly hands for you. Are you planning to use these hands to hold up the sky for the Juanshan conference?" As he spoke, his gaze, intentionally or not, landed on Yi Luyun's hands on the side of the table. Those hands were like white jade without a single wrinkle. They were not at all like the hands of an old man. Rather, they were like the hands of a girl who had never seen the sun and only knew how to embroider flowers and birds in her boudoir. This was the sign of Yi Luyun abandoning his sword and mastery of Sanzhou many years ago when Yi Qingmei pushed Wu Zhu into Qing Kingdom's Jingdou. After the first battle between Wu Zhu and Yi Luyun, it had not changed at all in all these years. Yi Luyun listened to Fan Xian describe his hands as womanly. His eyes, which were as calm as autumn water, gradually began to boil. The key to negotiation was to grasp the other party's emotions, even if the other party was a high and mighty great grandmaster. Thus, when Fan Xian discovered that the true anger in Yi Luyun's heart was about to explode, he immediately changed the topic and slowly said, "There should still be some time before the Black Knight's act. If you truly care about your filial son and grandson in the garden, shouldn't you give Mr. Zhou to me?" Yi Luyun gazed at him with a not quite there smile. It was as if he was mocking him or looking at an ignorant child. "At this time you are willing to accept my conditions?" Fan Xian lowered his eyelids slightly, but his heart gave a thump. He had originally thought that since Yi Luyun was not afraid of the hardship of sneaking the Juanshan conference account master to Baoyue brothel, he had the intention of using Mr. Zhou to exchange for the Yi family descendant in the Juanshan conference. Did the other party not have this intention at all? "I have never accepted any conditions under coercion." He raised his head and looked with great sincerity at Yi Luyun's simple face with his calm eyes. "But this does not mean that I am not willing to come to some kind of agreement with an elder worthy of respect." Hearing this, Yi Luyun was finally moved. He sighed and said, "As expected, shameless." Fan Xian smiled slightly and said, "You use martial power to coerce people and I use human lives to coerce people. If we're talking about shamelessness, it's actually not too far off." Yi Luyun slowly stood up. Fan Xian's heart froze, but his expression was calm. He once again opened the pitiful fan that was already wet and deformed and waved it randomly. Yi Luyun looked at the fan in his hand. A glimmer of a smile flashed through his eyes. He could see the true nervousness in the depths of this young man's heart. "Don't think that you understand everything and that you can control everything," Yi Luyun said. "Otherwise one day, you will die a very pitiful death. Otherwise there will come a day when you will die a pitiful death. You are a smart person, but don't be too smart. You are smart, but don't be too smart," Yi Luyun lectured. "You should know how to deal with the following matters." Yi Luyun slowly lowered his head and allowed the bamboo hat to cover his simple face. Holding the long sword tied in rough cloth, he walked to the side of the railing and turned his hand to grab Mr. Zhou by the collar. Fan Xian finally felt a glimmer of helplessness and bewilderment. If the great Yi Luyun had not come to deliver Count Zhou to him, why would he condescend to talk with him for so long? Yi Luyun turned his head. The mist in his eyes gradually grew. A faint but terrifying killing intent shocked Fan Xian's body. In the end he slowly said, "I am carrying a sword, not pretending to be that idiot Sigu Jian. Perhaps you have forgotten that I used a sword in the past." As he spoke he slowly pulled out his sword. The snow-white edge did not reflect a glimmer of light. It was as if all of the light had been sucked into the steady and pure white palm. Fan Xian's eyelids twitched. He gathered his thoughts and desperately bit the tip of his tongue. The pain made him a little more awake. In a moment of life and death, all schemes and battles of wits were fake. He anxiously forced out all of the surging tyrannical zhenqi from the snowy mountain behind him. Channeling it to his fists, he struck forward. It struck the table. Accompanied by a strange scream, Fan Xian's entire body was shaken by his own domineering fists. His body twisted in the air like a dog in a sorry state. Frightened and miserable, he turned into a black line and rushed out of the building at a speed that was very admirable. Fan Xian swept onto the long street. His entire body floated in the air, but his eyes were filled with shock. Even at this moment he could still feel the fierce and murderous sword intent chasing after him. It was as if it could cut him in half at any moment. He twisted his body, flicked his leg, opened his mouth and spat out blood. Suddenly he sped up again and somersaulted 3 times in the air. The tip of his foot kicked the green banner on the opposite building. Using the force of the soft bounce, he turned into a wisp of smoke and landed on the street. The 6 Tiger Guards and Overwatch Council swordsmen had long charged over and protected him firmly in the center. Layer upon layer they fearlessly acted as a human shield. In an instant, Fan Xian felt that he was surrounded by people. He could not see what was happening outside. A glimmer of emotion flashed through him. His entire body once again entered its most sensitive state, ready to escape at any moment. However, there was a strange silence on Chang Street. Fan Xian did not move rashly. He hid behind the guards. After an indeterminable amount of time, he finally felt something was strange. He ordered his subordinates to open up a small crack. Yi Luyun was no longer in Baoyue brothel. Following the crack that his nervous subordinates revealed, Fan Xian looked at the end of Suzhou's Chang Street. A cloth-clothed man wearing a straw hat was carrying a person and slowly walking toward the city gate. Although he was walking slowly, it seemed that each step of the other person covered dozens of feet as he gradually moved farther away. Fan Xian swallowed and moistened his burning throat. With a face full of confusion, he wormed his way out of the crowd and stood on Chang Street, staring in a daze at Yi Luyun's back in the distance. Ai Gouda had already come down from the opposite building. Seeing the commissioner safe and sound, he was overjoyed. In a trembling voice he asked, "Sir, are you all right?" Fan Xian hid his slightly trembling hands behind his back and forced himself to be calm. What could be wrong? As he spoke, he watched Yi Luyun's back disappear into the city gate. At this moment, no one noticed that other than the opening Gouda had made, there were gradually new changes on the top floor of Baoyue brothel. Beside the table that Fan Xian's fists had shattered, a hole suddenly appeared in the thick layer of red paint that was about half the height of a person on the thick pillar. The fan that Fan Xian had thrown down when he fled had disappeared. The hole in the paint split open even more like a wretched wound. The skin was flipping outwards, revealing the wood inside. However, the solid wood inside also slowly split open. The crack was so deep that the bottom couldn't be seen. It seemed to have already pierced through this thick pillar. It was not just this pillar. All of the wooden pillars, railings, carriage walls, decorations and flower tables on the top floor of Baoyue brothel began to show cracks along the height of a person. The cracks gradually spread, gradually stretched and gradually connected into one. It was as if an ink line had been drawn along that area in an instant by the work of the uncanny. However, this line was not drawn with ink. It was drawn with a sword. With a crisp crack, the first to fall was the flower pot rack placed in the corner of the top floor of Baoyue brothel. The flower pot landed on the floor and shattered into pieces. Then there was a loud crash. The long street had long been cleared. There was only Fan Xian and the dozens of trusted subordinates surrounding him. Hearing the sound, these people unconsciously raised their heads to look to the upper right. Everyone, including Fan Xian, was dumbstruck. Everyone's eyes were filled with shock and terror. Everyone's mouths were wide open, revealing teeth that were either perfectly white, full of tea stains, or missing a few teeth. They did not react at all when the dust and gravel that gradually filled the air blew into their mouths. Baoyue brothel had collapsed. More accurately, it should be the top floor of Baoyue brothel had collapsed. More accurately, half of the top floor of Baoyue brothel at this moment was neatly and tidily collapsing according to a perfect design, sending dust flying into the air. The dust gradually settled. Everyone could see clearly that it was as if the top floor of Baoyue brothel had been split open from the middle by a heavenly sword. The top had completely caved in, leaving only half of the neatly arranged wooden boards and decorations. The break was very neat and smooth. It truly was as if a large sword had split it open from the middle. Of course, at this moment, everyone knew that this had indeed been split open by a person, using a sword. The feeling they had at the beginning resurfaced in everyone's hearts. This person was not a person. Fan Xian was the first person on the long street to close his mouth. He looked at the city gate that had long disappeared without a trace of people. He then turned his head to glance at his own half-broken building. He couldn't resist slapping his face heavily to convince himself that this was truly what had happened. When the people of the Overwatch Council and Tiger Guards came back to their senses, the gaze they turned to Fan Xian was somewhat strange. It was filled with shock and lingering fear as well as confusion. They wondered how the commissioner had come out alive. This question. Fan Xian himself was not very clear. Deng Ziyu. Fan Xian's voice was slightly raspy. The rims of his eyes were filled with an unhealthy red. As he coughed, he said, "Go over there." It was clear that Deng Ziyu was still in a half-dazed state. After Fan Xian angrily said it twice, he woke up and quickly made a sound of acknowledgement. Fan Xian called him in front of him and lowered his voice. "I'm saying if someone surrenders, then you must protect their life." Deng Ziyu was slightly startled. He raised his head to look at the commissioner. A glimmer of shame flashed through Fan Xian's eyes. "Bring the person back. No, have the Black Knight send him directly back to Jingdo." He sighed in his heart. "Don't get involved with me anymore. Let your elders play with their own matters. I can't endure this kind of mental torture anymore." Deng Ziyu accepted the order and turned his head to glance at the half-broken building. He couldn't resist swallowing. In a trembling voice he asked, "Sir, who exactly is that person?" Fan Xian glared at him and said, "Didn't Gao to say it was Sigu Jian?" It was no wonder Deng Ziyu was a trusted aide from the Second Bureau. He very straightforwardly retorted, "The council reports clearly wrote that Sigu Jian is still in Dongyi." Fan Xian directly cut off his words and said angrily, "Look at this broken building. The other party is a great grandmaster. Is his whereabouts something our crows can keep track of?" Deng Ziyu didn't understand why Fan Xian was angry. He quickly accepted the order and found a horse to leave the city in a hurry to meet up with the Black Knights. After Deng Ziyu left, Fan Xian continued to stand on the long street, unwilling to return to Hua Garden. His subordinates and the Tiger Guards could not persuade him, so they could only stand with him. Fan Xian couldn't resist glancing at his half-broken building again. He wanted to say something but he restrained himself. Before long, a fast horse from the Overwatch Council returned. Report already out of the city gate. Another number of hours passed. Report already past the evening pavilion. Finally, another rider arrived in a panic. Report already past the 7 Li slope. The 7 Li slope was more than 7 Li from Suzhou. It was already on the official road back to Jingdo. It was a full 20 Li. Although no one dared to believe that the man in the bamboo hat was able to travel 20 Li in such a short time, once they thought of his identity, they somewhat understood. After confirming that the extraordinary warrior who had cut a building in half had left Suzhou, everyone let out a breath. Tiger Guard Gauda wiped away the cold sweat on his forehead and moved closer to Fan Xian's side. In a quiet voice he said, "Sir, should we arrange for someone to stop him?" "Who can stop him?" Gauda thought for a moment and realized that he had indeed said something stupid. He quickly said, "We have to quickly write a secret report and send it to Jingdo." Fan Xian furrowed his brows and said, "I'm afraid there won't be enough time, but it has to be written." Deng Diwen. He called over another member of the Qinian unit. He was the original swordsman of the 6th Bureau responsible for protecting Xia Qifei a few days ago. When Deng Ziyu was not by his side, he was the one Fan Xian trusted the most. Fan Xian did not avoid Gouda and straightforwardly said in a cold voice, "Go notify the governor's yamen. Tomorrow, go to Ming Garden and turn in all of the Ming family's private soldiers." Gouda listened to the side and his heart trembled slightly. He had indeed not thought that after such a dangerous moment had passed, the first thing the commissioner would think of was how to use this matter to his own advantage. The imperial envoy being attacked was a major event. Presently the people of Jiangnan were angry. Everyone would certainly think of the Ming family. Using this matter to once again weaken the Ming family at the same time, it could slightly reduce the people's resentment toward the old Ming matriarch's death. Gouda truly admired the commissioner from the bottom of his heart. After confirming that Yi Luyun had left Suzhou, Fan Xian's heart relaxed involuntarily. However, there was still a great doubt and confusion in his heart. However, it was impossible for him to talk to anyone about it. Looking again at the half-broken building beside him, he couldn't resist cursing with a gloomy expression. How much silver is this going to cost to repair? That old bastard. Hearing these words, everyone couldn't help but be shocked. Immediately they froze and didn't dare to open their mouths. The long street was silent again. No one had thought that the commissioner would dare to curse a great grandmaster in the middle of the street. Fan Xian looked at everyone's strange expressions and a wave of anger surged up for no reason. He opened his mouth and cursed loudly, "This is my building. Someone else is tearing it down and I can't even curse? That's an old bastard." Gouda's heart was complicated. He wanted to go cover the commissioner's mouth, but he didn't have the courage. He couldn't help but admire the commissioner even more. He was indeed a courageous and exceptional figure. Earlier, Fan Xian had dealt with it alone upstairs, which had already made these subordinates indescribably amazed. Later, he was able to survive and successfully make the great grandmaster float away. Everyone admired the commissioner even more to the bone. Of course, what they admired the most was that Fan Xian still dared to curse in the middle of the street after the matter. Under everyone's admiring gazes, Fan Xian mumbled something, but no one heard it clearly. They only saw his body go limp and he was about to fall down in the middle of the long street. A patch of flowers floated past. A girl supported Fan Xian's body. Everyone recognized this person and knew she was the commissioner's confidant, so they were not nervous. They were just a bit worried. It looked like the commissioner had still suffered internal injuries in the face of an extraordinary and saintly great grandmaster. Everyone hurriedly followed the young man and woman in front of them toward Hua Garden. It was only at this time that the governor's manor soldiers arrived late. Fan Xian tilted his body slightly and fell into the girl's embrace. Smelling the faint fragrance, he couldn't resist grumbling. "He's already gone before you dared to come out." An apologetic expression flashed across Haitang's face. "I can't beat him." Fan Xian couldn't resist rolling his eyes. "Who can beat this kind of monster?" Haitang asked worriedly. "You suffered internal injuries?" "No," Fan Xian replied seriously. "I pretended for too long upstairs. Actually, my legs have long gone limp from fear." The last chapter was actually written in a hurry. Many places were rather rough, such as a lot of typos, so I was embarrassed to narcissistically admire myself at the end of the chapter. This was in response to a cute question from a book friend. Then there was Yi Luyun coming to Suzhou. The logical problem of coming and then leaving is established, but the specific reason cannot be explained. The inside story is detailed in the next volume, Pleasure Before the Palace. P.S. The south was cold and the whole family caught a cold. One brother's parents went south for the new year and ended up stuck on the Hunan Railway. Another brother wanted to go north for the new year, but the train stopped running so he could only be alone. What is this? Fortunately, there is a sky full of white snow to edify. I wish everyone good health. Photoshop again. Occasionally I think of something. Now that the story is good, why is there less strangeness in the words? I want to find the part that makes me feel good. Photoshop again. Today the word count seems to have increased. Originally there were only 8,900 words. Photoshop now it's over 9,000 words. Tomorrow I'll write a chapter to make up for it. I'm too lazy to change. To be continued. If you want to know what happens next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 403. In front of a valley about 20 li from Suzhou City, a manor without any special features was quietly waiting for dusk to descend. With the arrival of dusk, the night gradually fell. 400 black horses held coins in their mouths and cloths under their hooves as they quietly surrounded the manor like the grim reaper of the night. What followed was a bloody battle. The black knights outside the garden shot fire arrows into the garden, and the people inside were lighting their own fires. Smoke signals rose, lives were lost, and the garden was destroyed. The Black Knights were the 5th Bureau of the Overwatch Council. It was the most powerful department, but there was no one in the Yamen. They always waited outside Jingdo for Qin Pingping's transfer. It was not until later that the Overwatch Council gained a young commissioner that the Black Knights split into two. 1,000 followed Fan Xian. From this, one could see how much Qin Pingping valued Fan Xian. Last year, when Fan Xian went on a diplomatic mission to northern Qi, the Black Knights had escorted him all the way to the border. Furthermore, at Wudu, they had successfully annihilated the army that Shang Shanhu had sent to rescue Xiao En. The Black Knights who had been on standby in Jiangbei finally had a place to use their skills today. However, the deputy commander of the Black Knights who was riding at the foot of the mountain did not have any excited expression. To them this was just a simple task. The commander of these 400 Black Knights was the deputy commander of the 5th Bureau, surnamed Jing Wuming. Jiang Jing sat steadily on his horse and looked at the raging fire in the garden. His right hand slowly pressed against his face and took off the black mask that covered his face, revealing a pale face and a pair of cold and emotionless eyes under the mask. The mission the commissioner had given them had been completed. However, they had not expected that this unremarkable garden would have such a powerful martial force that even the Black Knights had suffered some damage. The most terrifying thing was that everyone in the garden seemed to know that they had only one path to death. They fought with all their might. Not a single person surrendered. Jiang Jing did not know who was in the garden. He was only carrying out the commissioner's orders. Furthermore, the people in the garden had set fire themselves. Some evidence that could not see the light of day had probably long been destroyed. He grabbed the rope, and the horse's hooves clattered as it slowly approached the burning garden. The cavalrymen under him were treating the wounded and cleaning up the scene. His eyes were filled with killing intent as he watched all of this. Suddenly his eyelids twitched. The 5 riders burst out of the fire, flickering with black flames, as if they were the ghost death cavalry of the netherworld. Other than the knights in black armor, there were also a few people who were tied up like rice dumplings. Jing Jing pressed his right hand on his face again and put on the black mask again before the 5 riders arrived. His thin lips slightly opened and a cold voice rang out. He was a little surprised. Alive? The 5 riders rode to his side and reported, "These 5 people are hiding in the well and have surrendered." Even though Jiang Jing was cold, there was an additional unexpected joy in his heart. The corners of his lips twitched and revealed a cold smile. The commissioner should be happy. With this garden's desperate resistance and the plan to burn indiscriminately, it was indeed not easy to capture them alive. Jiang Jing looked at the 5 captives tied up on the horse and felt a little strange in his heart. Back to Suzhou. The surface of the black mask reflected the golden flames. It looked extraordinarily colorful and had a chilling aura. Under the mask, Jiang Jing coldly gave the order. Outside the garden, the neighing of horses tore through the silence of the dark night in the valley. The horses' hooves clattered slightly before they formed up again. In unison, they became 3 black torrents and circled around the burning manor. They swept diagonally across the road at the foot of the mountain and disappeared into the night. Not long after the Black Knights left the mountain like ghosts and entered the plains, they ran into Deng Ziyu and his group, who had come to receive orders, and received the commissioner's latest order. Jiang Jing was silent for a moment and arranged for a small group of riders to escort the captives to Jingdo. The remaining hundreds of night death gods did not enter the city. Instead, they quietly found a place to cross the river and returned to the camp in Jiangbei. After Deng Ziyu reported back to Hua Garden, Fan Xian only nodded his head to indicate he understood. In his study, he finished writing a secret memorial to the emperor and handed it to a subordinate in the council to quickly send it back to Jingdo. Then he went alone to the main hall of Hua Garden. Bright lanterns hung high in the main hall, illuminating it brightly. In particular, the chest of snowflake silver was lying quietly in the chest, reflecting an alluring light. Fan Xian glanced at the chest of silver and shook his head. Sighing, he sat on a chair beside the chest and thought to himself that silver was indeed very useful. 138,880 taels of silver were neatly stacked up in the chest. Fan Xian couldn't resist glancing at it again and sighed again. In the end he gave up on the thought in his heart. Facing Yi Luyun, that feeling of helplessness and powerlessness actually made Fan Xian angry. Of course, he did not feel any unnecessary self-pity or humiliation. Not being able to defeat a great grandmaster was a matter of justice. However, he knew that no matter how his life developed in the future, there would come a day when he would face a great grandmaster. Even if it wasn't Yi Luyun, Sigujian or that person in the palace, he would still have to face them head-on. However, Yi Luyun had cut the building in half with one strike in that powerful aura that filled the heaven and earth. It all made Fan Xian clearly realize that the current him was completely helpless against someone of the great grandmaster level. It was the same logic as the Ming family being completely helpless against him. A great grandmaster was too powerful, so powerful that he could ignore the encirclement of normal martial power. No wonder the emperor had always been lukewarm toward the Yi family. No wonder Kuhi was able to support that pair of orphans and widows. No wonder an idiot like Sigujian could protect Dongyi. Fan Xian thought to himself and sighed. He began to miss his dear uncle Wuzhu. Immediately he overturned his thoughts. He only had one life. He couldn't always rely on his uncle to resolve his worries and remove difficulties. Particularly, Wuzhu couldn't have any advantage when facing these great grandmasters. From the depths of his heart, Fan Xian didn't want Uncle Wuzhu to take risks. Then, how could he kill a great grandmaster? Under the company of a chest of silver and a hall full of lights, Fan Xian sank into deep thought. In an instant, he had already simulated many scenarios and themes in his mind. What kind of place of certain death and certain killing opportunity would he have to create in order to kill a great grandmaster on the spot? His palm unconsciously patted the chest. Suddenly he stood up and yelled in a loud voice, "Meeting! Meeting!" As he yelled, he walked toward the back of the hall. The commissioner had called for a meeting, so no one dared to slight it. The upper-level officials the Overwatch Council had placed in Hua Garden, all of the members of the Qinian unit, and the 7 Tiger Guards all gathered in the conference hall. Fan Xian's butt had just landed on the chair when he couldn't resist laughing and scolding, "Help Sir Lin back to play." He glared at the third prince, who had come to watch the spectacle, and Dabao, who had run in at some point, and had the serving girls help these two back. Glancing at the number of people present, he shook his head and said, "Invite Shi Chanli and Sang Wen over as well." The subordinate accepted the order and left. In a moment, Shi Chanli and Sang Wen also arrived in the hall. Shi Chanli often helped his teacher handle some affairs, so he was not unfamiliar with this kind of meeting situation. On the contrary, Sang Wen's gentle face was filled with hesitation and shock. She thought the imperial envoy was discussing the important matters of court. What was she, a singer, doing here? The theme of today's meeting is very simple. Everyone open your minds. If you have any strange ideas, be bold and say them. Fan Xian rubbed his temples and said with a headache, "I really can't think of anything by myself." Tiger Guard Gauda glanced at him and saw the commissioner's worry, but he didn't know what he was worried about. In a low voice he said, "Sir, please give your orders." "Brainstorm, brainstorm, brainstorm." Fan Xian forced a smile and said, "Everyone come and help come up with ideas." Everyone looked at him curiously, not knowing what ideas he wanted them to come up with. Fan Xian said very seriously, "What do you think it takes to kill a great grandmaster?" The discussion hall immediately became silent. All the subordinates looked at each other. Sang Wen was so shocked that she pressed her slightly wide lips together into a small cherry mouth. Shi Chanli had a strong urge to turn and leave. What was this discussion about? How could one kill a great grandmaster? If someone could actually think of a way, then the first thing the Qin kingdom and northern Qi would do was to send people to kill Sigujian according to the law. Then, the two countries would first divide the wealth of Dongyi with the noble women of the vassal states. Of all the people in the hall, Deng Ziyu's position was higher and he was closer to Fan Xian. Looking at his expression and the strange expressions of his colleagues, he carefully said, "Sir, were you injured by the sword Qi?" Fan Xian immediately cursed angrily, "I didn't injure my brain." He didn't care how shocked his subordinates were. In any case, he forced everyone to come up with ideas. For a moment, the people in the discussion hall were forced into a corner. They could only pick some absurd ideas to come up with. As they came up with ideas, everyone felt uneasy. A great grandmaster was revered by tens of thousands of people. He was a godlike figure. Yet, they had to follow the commissioner's orders and think of how to harm him. However, the Overwatch Council was, in the end, a sinister yamen flowing with black water. After saying a few words, everyone let go of their courage and felt a strange sense of pleasure. Meeting to discuss how to kill a great grandmaster. Even if they couldn't kill him, just thinking about it was exciting enough. Someone opened the discussion by saying that they could not defeat a great grandmaster. If they wanted to defeat him, first of all, they had to weaken his power and increase their own. They suggested using poison. Someone immediately retorted that a great grandmaster's martial power had reached perfection. Once poison entered the body, it would immediately turn into a puddle of snow water and be useless. Someone suggested that they should choose a medicine that stimulated the body's inherent qualities. It was not an external poison, but it could move the body's emotions or energy in a short time. Naturally, it would weaken afterward. Fan Xian coldly interrupted, "That's an aphrodisiac." Someone else said that if one wanted to take a person's life, one had to first disturb their will. If one wanted to kill someone, one had to first make them crazy. They should construct some special scene to intensify the great grandmaster's emotions and make his mind sink into confusion. Fan Xian nodded with great approval. In his heart, he was cursing Ouyang Feng's craziness. Deng Ziyu thought for a while and suddenly slapped the table. In reality, it's not difficult. As long as we think of a way to set up a trap so that the opponent can't escape easily, we can use the 6th Bureau's crossbow camps to surround him and release them in order without stopping or resting. We can exhaust his true strength. Even if we have to use tens of thousands of crossbow arrows, we have to weaken the opponent's body and chi. Then we can use the 5th Bureau's Black Knights to charge. After all, a great grandmaster is not a god. Fan Xian looked at him and asked, "How many people do you think will die with this plan of yours?" Deng Ziyu calculated and reported, "The 6th Bureau's crossbow camps will probably all be destroyed. There should still be 10% of the Black Knights alive." Fan Xian shook his head and said, "I want to kill people, not send my own people to their deaths." Deng Ziyu excitedly said, "If we can actually succeed, it doesn't matter how many people die." Fan Xian raised his brows and smiled coldly. "Then, how can you make the opponent not move and not escape? Just stand there and let you shoot and rush as you please? He's not a scarecrow." Deng Ziyu was silent. The brainstorming continued. The ideas everyone came up with became increasingly preposterous and nonsensical. Some people suggested becoming kidnappers, others suggested playing with an avalanche, and others suggested doing something to the latrine. Then the rebuttals also arrived. First, Sigu Jian did not have any family. His family had all been killed by him. At the same time, Dongyi never saw snow all year round. As for the last suggestion, everyone snorted disdainfully and couldn't be bothered with it. Fan Xian watched this scene with cold eyes and felt slightly at ease. This seemingly preposterous discussion was actually to lessen the shock in his subordinates' hearts at the Baoyue brothel incident. Yi Liuyun's sudden appearance had, without question, created a powerful shadow in their hearts. Even Gao Da's face had difficulty showing its original determination. Taking such a group of subordinates to do things, he couldn't allow them to be immersed in such inappropriate emotions. That was why Fan Xian would openly ask everyone to discuss how to kill a great grandmaster. After a few rounds of discussion, it was clear that the fear suppressed in the depths of everyone's hearts had lessened greatly. Other than excitement, it could be said that they had swept away the shock they had received during the day. The effect was good. Of course, the people in the discussion room did indeed bring up some effective methods. No one knew if Fan Xian would use them in the future. As for his subordinates taking Sigu Jian as their imaginary enemy, it was somewhat unexpected to Fan Xian. The people of the Qing kingdom would never think of dealing with Yi Luyun. Because they were in the honeymoon period with Northern Qi, because of Fan Xian's relationship with Hai Tang, and because the young lady of the Fan family had now become Master Ku He's last disciple, the subordinates would not blindly discuss how to kill Ku He in front of the commissioner. It was that pitiful Sigu Jian again. The discussion lasted until the candles were extinguished. After everyone dispersed, they continued to whisper among themselves in the garden. They were excited by the commissioner's daring action and couldn't help themselves. Fan Xian shook his head and called Sangwon over. Baoyue brothel is half destroyed. It will take at least half a month to repair. What arrangements have been made for the girls in the brothel? When they first went to evacuate the neighborhood, the guests in Baoyue brothel had all left. The girls had also been evacuated to a safe area. It was not until now that Fan Xian had the leisure to worry about his brothel business. Sangwon replied respectfully and cautiously, "The girls have been temporarily placed in other brothels. The bosses are very easy to talk to and have all taken them. However, staying in other brothels for a long time is not a good thing." Fan Xian nodded. In all of Suzhou there was no one who didn't look at his face. Those brothel bosses were probably more than happy to help take in their own girls. Then, Let Sher Chanli take the lead on the matter of recultivation. You can rest for a while. Fan Xian suddenly thought of something and raised his brows. A glimmer of ruthlessness appeared on his handsome face. Put away all of the detailed bills. When I return to the capital next year, I will find someone to collect on them. Sangwon made a sound of acknowledgement. Fan Xian asked, You don't have to live outside. Hua Garden is big. Spend a few days with Cece and help look after my brother-in-law. Sangwon smiled innocently and covered her mouth, not saying anything. What is it? Miss Haitang also said the same thing, Sangwon said with a light laugh. Those two girls have also been brought to the garden. Fan Xian was startled. Only now did he understand that she was talking about the two leading ladies of Baoyue Brothel, Liang Diandian and Ma Suasua. He couldn't help but be surprised at Haitang's meticulousness. Liang Diandian had not officially opened her cards, so it was indeed not appropriate for her to live in another brothel. As for Ma Suasua, that was the great prince's mistress. He had to take good care of her. To be continued. If you want to know what happened next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 404. Taking Sangwon with him into the back garden, Fan Xian raised his head to take a look. He saw the birds and swallows in the garden, green and red everywhere in harmony. It was the height of spring and approaching the height of summer. There was a cool breeze and a crescent moon hung in the sky. There were lanterns hanging under the fake mountains and green trees. The moonlight and lantern light blended together and added a sense of haziness. In this hazy light, a dozen girls were chattering away. The girls with clear and gentle features were not wearing much clothing. They were either standing under the trees or lying on the couches. Their postures were all different. Occasionally, a bright light seeped through the muslin. The faint fragrance from their bodies wafted directly into his nose. Fan Xian was startled. He couldn't help but have a certain illusion. Had he come to the silken cave? When had the Hua Garden become the Qin Garden? The girls chattered endlessly. For a moment they did not notice Fan Xian, who was standing with his back to the light. They were still enthusiastically talking about the Baoyue brothel incident during the day, the power of that one strike, and the imperial envoy scolding in the street. The main speaker was one of the two leading girls of the Baoyue brothel. The ones listening were the girls with wide eyes and expressions of curiosity or admiration. Fan Xian said in a low voice, Didn't they say that the girls in the brothel were all sent to other places? Sangwon covered her mouth and smiled. She explained, Aren't these the girls in the garden? Only now did Fan Xian come to his senses. He couldn't help but unconsciously glance at them a few more times. He sighed in his heart. It was said that girls changed 18 times between childhood and womanhood. How could these orphan refugee girls that Cece had picked up on the road have all grown so gorgeously after only a few days in Suzhou? Although there was still a childishness between their brows and their inexperience had yet to fade, there was a natural aura of youth that pressed against his face. It made one feel very happy. In particular, the back garden had always prohibited men from entering. The maidservants were listening to Liang Diandian's story during the day with great interest, so they were not particular about their manners. Some were lying on the couch with their buttocks sticking out, pretending to be arrogant and naive, while others were holding a fan and pretending to be virtuous. Their straight and slender legs, separated by a thin layer of cloth, presented all kinds of tight beauty. Big Brother's second nurse, Ma Suasua, was sitting in a chair listening to the story. Although she had seen the situation from a distance during the day, hearing it from Liang Diandian's sandalwood mouth made it even more shocking. However, Liang Diandian had not personally seen the inside story of the brothel, so her description of Fan Xian, his defeat in the face of danger and his extraordinary courage, was a bit exaggerated. She successfully created the image of a perfect young man that the kingdom of Qing should not have. The eyes of the girls in the garden all began to heat up and become bashful. They loved the imperial envoy to death, but they couldn't open their mouths, they didn't dare. Even Ma Suasua tilted her head slightly to look in front of the pool. A strange expression appeared in her eyes. Fan Xian swallowed. He knew that if he continued to watch, he would make many mistakes in life. Those girls were still growing, but sister-in-law and Liang Diandian were truly natural seductive creatures. Their eyebrows were like black, their lips like vermilion, and their eyes were full of spirit. If one looked at them and lost their spirit, how could one look again? He was just about to clear his throat to remind everyone when he heard a girl in the garden say something unintentionally. He closed his mouth and stood quietly with his back to the light. Sangwon glanced at him with confusion. She didn't know what had happened. The little girl was only 12 or 13. She opened her eyes wide and said innocently, "Sisters, why haven't we seen the mistress?" Because of the current situation, Fan Xian's group had lived in Hua Garden for a few months and hadn't moved to Hangzhou. During these days, Cici had brought these little girls to live in the garden. These girls had long known the name and identity of their benefactor. To be able to become the imperial envoy servant girl made them feel very lucky. However, it had been so long, yet they hadn't seen the mistress. This made them feel a bit strange. Liang Diandian listened to these words and paused slightly. She didn't say anything. These little girls didn't know. She was from Jingdo, so she knew about the explosive marriage between Fan and Lin. The young lady of the Lin family was the illegitimate daughter of the eldest princess. This matter had gradually changed from a secret known only to the nobility of the court to a rumor circulating among the people. Although it had not been proven, not many people didn't believe it. Everyone under heaven knew that Sir Fan Jr. and Xinyang had long become like fire and water. This matter, a girl spat and scolded, "What right do we have to discuss the matters of the master's family? If Cici hears it, be careful of your mouth." The girl in front of her laughed foolishly and said, "He actually, she just wanted to see what kind of fairy-like appearance the mistress is worthy of the young master." In their hearts, Fan Xian was a top-notch figure. Naturally, they were curious about what kind of person Lin Wanner was like. "I hear this mistress is also a virtuous young lady from a noble family." Liang Diandian suddenly rolled her eyes and smiled sweetly. "However, I hear her appearance isn't all that outstanding. I'm afraid she can't even compare to Cici." "That's true. How many people can be worthy of the young master? I really don't know in the future. Right, isn't there a girl living in our garden? It's just that we haven't seen her often." "What a big attitude." Liang Diandian gave a not quite there smile and said, "I hear, she is also Sir's confidant. However, she's not Cici, she's an old man. She has no name or status." "Shut up." The servant girl who vaguely knew Haitang's identity couldn't scold Liang Diandian. She could only grab the girl and quickly scold, "You really want to die? How could such a noble person put on airs for you to see?" Fan Xian couldn't listen to it anymore. He coughed and walked into the light. The servant girls jumped in fright and rose one after another. Restraining their spirits and breathing, they bowed in unison toward Fan Xian and said gently, "Greetings, young master." The way they were addressed in Hua Garden was still according to the rules of the courtyards in Jingdo. Fan Xian looked at these girls and shook his head. He thought to himself that the discussion in his own garden was already like this. He didn't know how unbearable the rumors outside would be. However, he was also an open-minded person and couldn't be bothered to care about what other people silently criticized. Slowly he said, "It's late. Go to sleep." The servant girls stuck out their tongues and bowed again. They quickly tidied up their clothes and quietly returned to their own rooms. Only Liang Diandian and Ma Suasua were called down by Fan Xian. Fan Xian stared at Liang Diandian's beautiful and naturally charming face and didn't speak for a moment. Liang Diandian was slightly happy, but she didn't show it on her face. On the contrary, she purposely appeared weak and timidly lowered her head, showing her most beautiful side. Back in the year of the marriage between Fan and Lin in Jingdo, according to the rumors in the marketplace, Fan Xian truly loved his sick wife dearly. From this, one could tell that Sir Fan Jr. valued relationships. In the boudoir, Fan Xian was the dream lover of all the girls. Although Liang Diandian had grown up on a pleasure boat, she was no exception. However, she had some uncomforting scheming and considerations. Liang Diandian was very confident in her appearance. She thought to herself that the young mistress was not as beautiful as her, yet she was able to receive Sir Fan Jr.'s love. This man probably liked to take pity on others and had purposely put on such an appearance. Furthermore, after the Suzhou branch of Baoyue brothel had opened, Sir Fan Jr. had not allowed her to receive guests. Presumably he was also interested in her. Feeling Fan Xian's unmoving gaze, Liang Diandian's happiness gradually grew. She lowered her head shyly and didn't say a word. Standing behind Fan Xian, Sangwon watched this scene. A disgusted smile rose to the corners of her lips. Fan Xian suddenly opened his mouth and said, "Everyone has the right to live better, so I don't dislike your way of thinking." Liang Diandian raised her head in shock and met Fan Xian's emotionless gaze. Only now did she know she had misunderstood. Her heart jumped. Fan Xian continued coldly, however, I don't like it. Liang Diandian was overwhelmed with shame and didn't dare to say anything. No one is born to serve others. If you don't want to work in Baoyue brothel, have shopkeeper Sang turn you into a Qing household. Once you've earned back the silver you will be allowed to leave. Fan Xian stared at her beautiful face and said, Sangwen, pack her luggage and find another place to live. Sangwen was startled. She had not expected the commissioner to be so heartless. However, she didn't say anything. She brought Liang Diandian, whose eyes were glistening with tears, into the manor to pack. At this moment, there was only Fan Xian and Ma Suasua left in the garden. Ma Suasua suddenly opened her mouth and said in a quiet voice, Sir, is Suasua also going out of the manor to avoid polluting the peace of this garden? The corners of Fan Xian's mouth twitched slightly and he laughed bitterly. Looking at the Hu tribe princess's eyes that were like the blue sea, her straight nose and her deep and beautiful face, he quietly said, Stay here, don't talk too much, don't ask too much. I like you very much. If there is a chance in the future I will help you. Ma Suasua was slightly surprised and raised her head to look at Fan Xian. It was as if she hadn't thought that he would see everything so clearly and reveal such intentions. She couldn't help but gratefully say, Thank you, sir. Fan Xian calmly said, No need to thank me. I have always liked to stand on ice and see the world. Returning to the room, Cici had already prepared hot water. After washing his face, he dipped his feet into the hot water. Fan Xian sighed with satisfaction and immediately closed his eyes. He began to follow the method Haitang had taught him, using small drops to repair the meridians that had been injured by Yi Liuyun's sword qi. Ever since he was young, his method of cultivation was different from that of others. The proper process of meditation was as easy as napping for him. After an indeterminable amount of time, his eyelids opened slightly and Jinqi circulated through his entire body. He found that he was already much more comfortable. He also found that the room was quiet and couldn't help feeling a little strange. Looking to the side, he found that Cici had already fallen asleep on the desk. It was probably because she had been worried for too long during the day and waited for too long at night that the girl was unbearably sleepy. Fan Xian smiled and didn't wake her up. He grabbed a towel and wiped the water off his feet. Gently he walked behind her and placed his robe on her body, worried that she would catch a cold. He stood behind Cici for a while and looked at the strands of messy hair at the back of the girl's spotlessly white neck. He couldn't help but sigh. He thought of the time when he and Cici were copying books in Danzhou. How relaxed, happy and free it was. There were no outside matters to worry about. There was only a bean lantern, an ink stone, a bald brush and a delicate attendant. The two of them sat side by side copying the story of the stone. Although they didn't have any glyphs, those dots of graceful handwriting were truly fragrant. He thought for a bit and then gently pressed his right hand against the back of Cici's neck and helped her rub it. He applied some Jinqi to a few acupuncture points to help her adjust her breathing and sleep. Only then did he carefully lift her up and put her on the bed. Pulling the thin blanket over her, he finally felt reassured and patted her face. He then picked up his shoes and walked out of the room. The moment he closed the door, he seemed to see the soundly sleeping Cici. A safe and satisfied smile appeared on his face. Wearing a robe, pulling on his shoes and shrugging his shoulders, Fan Xian strolled through Hua Garden without a care for his image. It was as if he wanted to borrow the night breeze to blow away the depression in the depths of his heart. Although the Hua Garden that the salt merchant Yang Jimei had given him was beautiful, it was a pity that it could not calm his heart. There were too many things weighing down on his heart. Uncle Wu Zhu was not by his side and Wan Er was not by his side. He truly had no place to complain, no place to discuss and no place to vent. No one knew why he had done things in such a hurry in Jiangnan and why he did not care about anything in order to turn things around. Including his friends, his subordinates, his enemies, and his family, everyone seemed to have an erroneous judgment toward Fan Xian. This kind of judgment was what made Fan Xian most angry. Everyone thought that Fan Xian could be ruthless when it came to the struggle for power. Thus, intentionally or unintentionally, everyone had forgotten the countless threads of connection between him and the eldest princess. They only waited to see how he would stomp Xinjiang into the ground. They had not thought that not only would Fan Xian stomp, but he would stomp beautifully. Fan Xian did not have a shred of affection for the eldest princess, but his affection for Wan Er was deeply rooted. After all, Wan Er was the eldest princess' own daughter. Everyone had forgotten this point. Everyone had purposely forgotten this point. Fan Xian was very angry and gloomy. Although he had already secretly made arrangements, he was still angry. If one day the eldest princess truly died at his hands, what would happen to Wan? Nowhere to complain, nowhere to complain. Fan Xian could not stop his steps. It was like this in officialdom in Jianghu, and it was also like this in Hua Garden. He strode around the quiet pond and walked through the long and desolate corridor. Purely subconsciously, he followed that familiar stone path and walked to the quiet study at the back of Hua Garden. He raised his head to look at the door and couldn't resist smiling self-mockingly. How had he come here again? In Shishua Xinu, Wang Xinji lived in Shanin. Because he missed Priest Dian, he braved the snow and took a boat through the night to visit. As the morning light shone brightly, the king arrived in front of the Dai family's door. Without knocking, he turned and left. The servant put down the large chair. The king said, "I came in high spirits and left when my spirits are exhausted. Why should I see Dian?" Fan Xian did not have this kind of awkward scholarly bearing. He also did not like to play tacit. He was even more ashamed of teacher Su and Fan Xian's affectation. Since he had come, he knew that he was already used to coming to find her to discuss things when he faced true difficulties in his state of mind. He wanted to find a way, at least a way to calm his heart. Thus, he walked up the stone steps and gently pushed the door under the moon. The study was not bolted. During this half-year she had lived there, quietly, alone in a secluded part of Hua Garden. Haitang had long woken up when he arrived at the door. She had already sat up on the bed. She wore a flowery robe and sat at the head of the bed, looking at him with a not quite there smile. There was no light in the study. Only the faint moonlight from outside seeped in. Given their realms, they could clearly see everything in the room and the expression on each other's faces. The night was a bit cold. Fan Xian rubbed his hands and turned to close the door. He tugged on his shoes and walked to the side of Haitang's bed. Without a trace of politeness, he lifted a corner of the brocade quilt and burrowed in. Sitting on the other side of the bed, he looked at Haitang across the bed. The quilt was very warm. There was no fragrance. There was only a clean and warm feeling. Haitang looked at this scoundrel and helplessly said, "You have to know that I have thought about it. I am still going to marry in the future." Fan Xian's feet rubbed against the cotton cloth on the bed and sighed comfortably. He was also surprised and disappointed that he hadn't touched Haitang's feet. It looked like the girl across from him was sitting cross-legged. He said, "I am the adulterer." He then smiled and said, "You are the whore." "Of course," he said with a smile. "This is what people say." Haitang glared at him. Fan Xian said, "There is only one thing that I will not be satisfied with even if I die. Although I am born a bit better than others, I do not have the intention to seduce you." "What? How can you insist that we have an affair?" Duo, I cannot accept this. Today I have already tarnished my reputation." It is not that I say a word of regret. In any case it is like this. Why don't we have another reason? These words were said with hidden bitterness. Haitang only sighed. Although this section wasn't printed, Cici copied it 2 days ago and showed it to me. Why do you have to use the same words Qingwen said in the 77th verse to ridicule me? I am not second master Bao, and you are not a pretty servant girl. Yi Luyun has not hurt you to the point of death. You are pretending to be resentful, but who knows what you are angry about in your heart. Fan Xian shook his head with a self-mocking smile and didn't speak for a moment. The study that had been converted into a bedroom sank into silence. "I don't like to play around," Fan Xian said quietly. "You probably don't understand what I mean, but I really do like to stay with you and talk." Haitang's bright eyes glowed in the dark night. "But right now we are indeed very intimate," Fan Xian said with a slight smile. "I had originally wanted to pour out the bitterness in my heart, but I didn't expect that I would suddenly have a thought and find another bitter matter. Everyone will marry someone." Fan Xian half leaned against the foot of the bed and closed his eyes slightly. "But why is it that when I think of you marrying someone else in the future, my heart is so unhappy?" The smile in Haitang's eyes gradually became more and more like the moon in the water, and the strands of moon in the water gradually leaking out of the bamboo basket. Her hands gently pulled at the corner of the blanket and covered her chest. Looking at Fan Xian's face, she slowly said, "Then, how about marrying you? I had a lot of fun writing this chapter. Men. I would like to thank Sean for the youthful video that you provided. It is the last day of the month. As usual, I ask for monthly votes. Rules? To be continued. If you want to know what happens next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 405. Haitang's words made Fan Xian feel very good and powerful. At this moment, this young man and woman were sharing a large blanket. Under the moonlit night, they were quietly talking about such moving matters. It was inevitable that they would descend into a very violent and cliché ending. However, Fan Xian was not surprised. He did not crawl under the bed in fright or turn into a wolf and pounce. He only said sincerely, seriously and straightforwardly, "Very good, let's discuss the wedding date." This sentence was in response to the, "How about marrying you?" Thus, it was Haitang's turn to be stunned. She felt as if she had spun a cocoon and was caught in it. She knew that she had once again underestimated the shamelessness and blackness under Fan Xian's gentle appearance. She chuckled and lowered her head. She was also muttering in her heart. Why did such a sentence pop up? During this year she and Fan Xian had often interacted. The two of them had long developed a sense of closeness and tacit understanding that went beyond friendship through familiarity. It was close to family. Fan Xian looked at her expression and knew what she was thinking. Raising his brows, he smiled and said, "Your Empress Dowager." "Your Emperor." Haitang raised her face and continued with a smile. "Your Baldy," Fan Xian continued with a serious expression. Haitang tilted her head slightly. "Your identity." "And your identity," Fan Xian said with a slight smile. These few sentences without a head or tail had already clearly laid out the obstacles and problems that lay between the two of them. When a man and a woman interacted, it was important to be of one heart. Although the two of them did not say sweet words of love, with the moonlight as proof, they could see through each other's thoughts. There were countless mediocre people in the world of mortals. It was rare to find a confidant who would easily pass it up and let it go. The problem was, the Qing Emperor certainly did not want Fan Xian to have such a powerful foreign aid from Northern Qi's Tianidao while he had such great power. Furthermore, the Northern Qi Empress Dowager had been urgently searching for a young and handsome man of equal status for Haitang this year. She could not let Haitang handle it herself. Fan Xian and Haitang's status in their respective countries meant that if the two of them broke out of their current situation and openly stood shoulder to shoulder, they would face unimaginable pressure. The Qing kingdom's side was easier to handle. Even if the Qing emperor did not like Fan Xian receiving foreign aid, given the emperor's powerful self-confidence, he would inevitably think of using Fan Xian's situation to further weaken Northern Qi's power. Fan Xian could use this reason to convince his father, who he was not very close to. In the eyes of the Qing people, Fan Xian marrying Haitang was a joyous matter that brought face to the Qing people. Who wouldn't want to take advantage of something? The resistance from Northern Qi must be great. Regardless of whether or not Northern Qi's self-proclaimed orthodox subjects could accept it, the pride of their country, Saintess Haitang, a Tianmai warrior, being married to the southern barbarians they despised deep down, including the Empress Dowager and Ku He, would all prevent this from happening. The two sides could discuss the exchange of students, but the Northern Qi people were clearly at a disadvantage when it came to marrying off girls. How could they be willing to do that? As for the little emperor, even Fan Xian admired his methods and didn't have any extravagant hopes that he would let go. Fan Xian smiled self-mockingly and said, "You came to Jiangnan because your little emperor asked you to supervise me making money. If you become my family's fated old woman, we can be considered a husband and wife shop, spending his money however we want. Wouldn't he be angry to death?" Haitang smiled and said, "If he heard your words, he would be angry to death." Fan Xian sighed and said, "Actually, if you marry me and our whole family go to a secluded place to spend the rest of our lives, it would work. Who cares how angry the courts of the two countries will be?" Haitang gazed at him with a not quite there smile. "Are you willing?" Fan Xian was silent for a moment and gazed back at her, unwilling to show weakness. "Are you willing?" The two of them met each other's eyes and knew that they both had ties in their hearts. They both had a sliver of kindness toward the world. Although Fan Xian's kindness came from his selfish heart and Haitang's came from her kind nature, no matter who it was, they could not leave lightly and coldly watch everything that happened in the world from beyond the clouds. They were all people who had entered the world. How could they be unworldly? The room once again fell silent. In the night sky above Hua Garden, the crescent moon suddenly pierced through the smoke-like clouds. Its light increased slightly and reflected off the walls and ponds in the garden and into the room. It covered the large bed, the brocade quilt, and the two wonderful people with a layer of light. Haitang looked at him calmly and suddenly smiled slightly. "What is important is that you already have a wife." Fan Xian fell silent. He knew these words were not easy to respond to. He had been reborn into this world for almost 20 years, yet he had never heard of the custom of taking two wives. Although he had once talked to Uncle Wu Zhu about the 3 representatives and the 3 main purposes on the cliff, one of which was to marry many wives, when things came to a head, he found that to be a Dumas with all the beauties alone was, in reality, very difficult. What was important was that his standards were too high. He sighed shamelessly. There was no need to talk about Wanner. She was the most favored princess in the palace. In front of him, Haitang, who could no longer bear to let go, had an incomparably lofty position in northern Qi. Earlier he had already laid out so many obstacles. What if he let Haitang enter as a concubine? Fan Xian shivered. Even he felt that this matter was somewhat ironic. Furthermore, he believed that the northern Qi people would certainly go crazy. Perhaps the 2 countries would go to war again. Are you cold? Haitang looked at him with a smile. Her hands pulled at the bedding and carefully covered her shoulders. Fan Xian smiled bitterly and sighed. My heart is cold. The night was indeed a bit cold. The large quilt was sleeping together, but it could not cover the 2 of them. Haitang pulled a little, and Fan Xian's upper body was empty outside. He shivered slightly and pulled it back. With a swish, Haitang was startled. She found that the quilt had been snatched away by him. She glared angrily at him and snatched it back. Fan Xian chuckled and didn't say anything. He snatched it back. The 2 of them played the childish game of snatching the quilt on the bed. Fortunately, neither of them used jinchi. Otherwise, how could the quilt be condemned to death? It would have long become thousands of cotton wads dancing in the night wind, torn apart and perished. But how could the quilt be so lucky? It could actually be fought over by the 2 most famous and powerful people of the younger generation, not giving an inch of land. The quilt was not a jade seal. If these 2 people followed the original course of history, perhaps many years later, they would be standing in each other's countries and fighting for the world. But now that they had begun to fight for the quilt, the world should not fight anymore. Heaven bless the people of the world. It was rare for them to have such a wild quarrel. The 2 of them closed their mouths tightly and glared at each other. Haitang's legs, which had been crossed, also came down. She kicked with embarrassment and anger. Thus, the lecher Fan Xian seized the opportunity. Fan Xian let go, and the large quilt was immediately snatched away by Haitang. With a whoosh, the curtains were rolled up, burying Haitang's upper body in the soft bedding. The girl let out a surprised cry. A pair of legs wearing thin panties were exposed outside the quilt. Particularly the pair of bare feet, they were pure white and tempting. Fan Xian stretched out his hand and covered this pair of feet. Haitang's feet trembled slightly, but she did not struggle. Don't catch a cold, Fan Xian said righteously. He was actually very proud in his heart. His grab earlier had indeed reached his highest realm. It was as fast as lightning, as fast as a gust of wind. Once the sunflower came out, it faintly had some of the realm of the blind uncle hitting people with a bamboo stick. How could Haitang dodge it? Perhaps Haitang did not even want to dodge? The touch was not bad. Fan Xian held the girl's feet in his arms and narrowed his eyes proudly. For some reason, his mind thought of his previous life. When he was in high school, it snowed heavily and he held the female class monitor's feet in his arms like this. Oh, only when he was happy would he remember those things that were already so far away that they were almost blurry. Let go. Buried in the quilt, Haitang spoke in a humming voice. However, there was an additional glimmer of anger in her tone. Fan Xian hesitantly let go. It completely went against the perseverance a man should have at this time. Haitang flipped the quilt off and looked at him angrily. However, her face was slightly red and her hair was messy. It looked very threatening. Fan Xian watched as she pulled her feet back into the quilt. He chuckled and didn't say anything. A slight blush appeared on Haitang's face. She glared at him and then turned toward the inside of the bed. Fan Xian quietly transformed into a black cat and crawled over. He lay next to her, but he lay very orderly. In a voice as thin as a mosquito's, he said, "It's cold. Give me a blanket." Haitang used a bee-like voice to buzz, "You don't have your own hands?" Although she said this, the girl still moved a little further in to give Fan Xian some space. At the same time, she left half of the quilt for him. Fan Xian lay down comfortably and sniffed hard. He found that he indeed didn't smell any body fragrance. There was only a peaceful, clean, and gentle feeling enveloping him. He opened a pair of bright eyes and looked at the ceiling of the tent in the dark night. The 2 of them lay on the same bed. Silence was awkwardness and awkwardness was warmth. Earlier, Fan Xian had said he didn't play around with warmth, but in reality he loved this feeling. He thought to himself, Duo has finally revealed her childish side today. It is very interesting, very interesting. He completely did not realize that his heart had a strange fetish. Haitang calmed down slightly. She carefully revealed her face and said, "You really don't want me to marry?" "Yes." Fan Xian put his hands behind his head and smiled slightly. "Even if you want to marry, you can't marry someone else. It can only be me." Haitang lost. "I came here today to pour out my troubles to you." Fan Xian glanced at the girl beside him and told her of his earlier worry in the garden. Haitang thought for a bit and then quietly said, "Isn't it inappropriate to tell me about the matter between you and your wife at this time?" Fan Xian was startled. Only then did he realize that he seemed to have been a bit of a bastard. He couldn't help but smile bitterly and say, "Fine, let's talk about Yi Luyun. I still don't understand why he would come to Suzhou and show himself." Once they got down to business, Haitang's childish side suddenly disappeared. She recovered her usual calm and stability. Turning around, she began to discuss and analyze with Fan Xian. At the same time, she told him about following Yi Luyun from afar along the way, as well as the story of what happened along the way. The two of them talked back and forth but still couldn't come to a conclusion. It was Haitang who suddenly said lightly, "There is one possibility. I wonder if you've thought about it?" "What is it?" Fan Xian asked curiously. Perhaps the emperor had long known of the Yi family's connection to the Juanshan conference, so Yi Luyun was not worried about the emperor knowing he had acted, Haitang said seriously. Fan Xian thought for a while and then shook his head. "It still doesn't make sense." After talking about Yi Luyun, what did they talk about? The old manor in Jingdou Lin Waner? Naturally, this was a question that was not convenient to talk about in bed. Fan Xian would more or less feel guilty. No matter how open Haitang's heart was, she was not an ignorant and senseless wooden person. Lying like this, their breaths intertwined, their body heat invaded, and their occasional contact, although it was not truly ecstatic, it still made the temperature in the blankets slowly rise. "Let's talk about the temple," Fan Xian said lightly, perhaps having made up his mind. A glimmer of gentleness and emotion flashed through Haitang's eyes. She smiled slightly and said, "By West Lake in Hangzhou. You said you only talked about worldly affairs." "The temple is my business," Fan Xian smiled and said. "In the future, it is also your business." For some reason, the warmth and trust in these words warmed Haitang. Even if she was the northern Qi Saint girl, able to enter and leave the palace without any hindrance, and had an outstanding status, where would she go to find a confidant, a true friend, someone who could treat her as an equal and treat her without any ill feelings? "Whoa?" Haitang got up slightly and gestured in the air with her finger. One up, one down, one up, one down. She drew a few semicircles. Her brows were furrowed tightly. "Then what does the symbol on the temple mean?" Fan Xian had already described in detail what Shaoan had told her in the cave. Only, out of consideration for the girl's feelings, he hid the matter of Master Ku He eating human flesh. Haitang listened quietly the entire time. When she recounted Shaoan's past in Northern Wei, a complicated emotion occasionally flashed through her eyes. In the end, she was puzzled by those symbols, so she opened her mouth to ask. "How would I know?" Fan Xian said with a headache. "It looks like one day I will have to go to the temple to take a look." Determination gradually appeared in Haitang's bright, limpid eyes. "I want to go." Fan Xian smiled. "I know how tempting this is for you, so you have to promise me, you can't sneak off by yourself." He pointed at his head and said, "Shaoan's route back in the day was hidden here." "Who was the girl who ran out of the temple?" Haitang asked. In reality, she had already faintly guessed. Although the answer did not surprise her, it still made her sigh uncontrollably. "My mother." Fan Xian spoke very proudly. Thus, the conversation began to turn back to the Yi family. Occasionally they would talk about the blind uncle's elegance. The more she listened to the details, the stronger the longing in Haitang's eyes became. Back then, what kind of era was that? The girl sighed. The 4 great-grandmasters all appeared in that era. Other than that, there were your mother and the blind uncle, 2 dazzling figures. Fan Xian joked, "In a few days you'll have to call me Granny." Haitang couldn't be bothered to pay attention to him. She sighed to herself. Coming out of the temple, could it be? Her eyes lit up. "Miss Yi should be a Tianmai being?" "What is a Tianmai being?" Fan Xian laughed coldly. Naturally, he wouldn't tell her the wondrous story of transmigration. "Everyone under heaven says you are a Tianmai being. What do you think?" Haitang smiled. "Teacher said that those who can receive the will of heaven and be chosen by the temple are Tianmai beings. I don't know why teacher calls me that." According to this saying, isn't Ku Hia Tian my being? The martial methods of your Channy Dao were truly stolen by my mother from the temple. They were stolen. They weren't taught by the immortals of the temple. This is a matter of scholars. Stealing books, how can it be stealing? Could Miss Yi have a special bloodline? Hai Tang suddenly became interested. Her bright eyes stared at Fan Xian's face. Your meridians are completely different from those of ordinary people. Otherwise, you would not be able to practice such strange and tyrannical martial methods. This must have something to do with your mother's past. Fan Xian looked at the girl's expression and knew what she was thinking. He smiled coldly and said, "Are you thinking that my future child might also be a strange one?" Hai Tang smiled faintly and didn't reply. Don't think about things like borrowing seeds. Fan Xian didn't know if it was because he thought of his romantic birth, but his anger flared. He lowered his voice and roared, "And don't think about putting aphrodisiacs in the wine." Hai Tang looked at his angry expression and only smiled and didn't say anything. See, Lily isn't pregnant. Fan Xian thought of that matter and a bellyful of fire gradually grew. The bodies of the two people under the blanket were already hot like fire. Now that the evil fire had been provoked, how could it not ignite the fire of desire? Fan Xian gritted his teeth and pressed his face together. He didn't care if Duo would easily kill him with a flip of her hand. He pulled her into his arms and held her. Holding her from behind, he felt the girl's slightly hot and trembling body in front of him. Fan Xian said by her ear, "If you are truly interested, you don't need to use aphrodisiacs. I'm also willing to give myself to you." Hai Tang laughed coldly and didn't turn her head. She lightly said, "Other than using your hands and feet, do you not have any other ability to make me admire you?" Fan Xian said angrily, "I only used my feet earlier. When did I use my hands?" Hai Tang seemed to have thought of something. Her voice suddenly softened. A moment later she quietly said, "On the official road out of the palace treasury." Fan Xian immediately remembered that day beside the spring woods. He had calmly held the girl's hand in his arms and refused to let go no matter what. The style of a man and a woman cared about one attacking and one defending, and turning defense into offense. However, Fan Xian and Hai Tang had been since last spring. He had written a poem in his mind and then used the special aphrodisiac move. In addition to the many subsequent encounters and clever changes, he had long moved from a battle of wits and strength to a battle of hearts and, finally, a battle of emotions. The relationship between the two of them had changed. Their emotions had changed. Their methods had also changed. Now what was the point of fighting? Was fighting with others truly endlessly joyful? Fan Xian actually didn't like it, so his hand passed under Duoduo's armpit and reached forward. Holding her hands, he contentedly rubbed his face against the back of her neck. Hai Tang only felt her face grow increasingly hot. This damned little rascal behind her was clearly someone with a wife, yet he kept on teasing her. It was truly despicable. But why was it that in this half a year, her heart had gradually become chaotic? The clear and natural state of mind of the past had long been lost. Why was this? She faintly sighed and said for the third time that night, "You really don't want me to marry." Fan Xian said vaguely, "You have to marry me and bring your sister. It's a pity you don't. You truly are shameless." For some reason Hai Tang suddenly felt embarrassed and angry. She gently bit her lip as she spoke. Fan Xian quietly said, "There's nothing I can do. If I don't ruin your reputation and sleep with you for a night, your wife is going to marry you tomorrow. I have no other choice." Hai Tang lost again. "Today you've said so many secrets, even the secrets of the temple. Aren't you afraid I'm using a honey trap?" Hai Tang suddenly said with a smile. Fan Xian seriously said, Duo, you're not a great beauty." The next morning Fan Xian pushed open the door and walked out. The morning light was bright and the cool breeze was very comfortable. He couldn't help but stretch. A serving girl's scream came from the garden. The serving girl immediately closed her mouth. Everyone knew that the imperial envoy and Hai Tang in the back of the garden had a private relationship, but the two of them had always maintained their politeness in front of everyone. There was not a trace of it. Who would have thought that Sir Fan Jr. would so openly walk out of the girl's boudoir? Walking out of the boudoir early in the morning, what did this mean? Fan Xian smiled slightly and gazed at the serving girl and warmly said, "Morning." He then walked to the front garden. Along the way, he saw the serving girls and subordinates and warmly said, "Morning." For a moment, the people in the garden did not understand. They thought, when did Sir Fan become so cultured and refined? How could his mood be so good that it made one's hair stand on end? Immediately, the shocking news gradually spread through the mouths of the servants throughout Hua Garden. Immediately after, it reached the ears of Fan Xian's subordinates. Cici's mouth was wide open as she listened to the news. Although she knew it would happen sooner or later, she still felt it was a bit sudden. In particular, she suddenly felt that the letter in her hand had become somewhat heavy. Last night, she had slept deeply and had forgotten to give this letter to the young master. She was the head serving girl of the old Danzhou manor. All her thoughts were on Fan Xian. She quickly asked the serving girl, "Where is the young master right now?" "In the front hall?" By the time Fan Xian had tidied up and was sitting in the front hall preparing to discuss matters, a few members of the Qinian unit, including Deng Ziyu as well as Gao Da and the 7 Tiger Guards, already knew the biggest news of the day in Hua Garden. The strong and powerful warriors looked at Fan Xian with respect on their faces. To be able to eat the northern Qi Saint girl, not only did it require courage, it also required great martial arts. Deng Ziyu was the only one with a worried expression. He was highly regarded in the old manor in Jingdou, and Lin Wanner was very good at managing her subordinates. She never hesitated to reward Fan Xian's personal guards. Furthermore, her personality was close and likable, so she was greatly respected and loved by the servants in the old manor. He suddenly felt that the situation was not good. Who would be the mistress of the Fan family in the future? He, as well as all the servants, stood on the side of the mistress. However, he couldn't help but think with a chill in his heart, if there was conflict in the Fan family in the future, how could the mistress defeat Haitang? Fan Xian didn't know what his trusted aide was thinking. He only continued to drink the porridge. In reality, the main reason last night was because talking with Haitang was too exhausting. He also had to make arrangements for Yi Liuyun's mysterious appearance and analyze the situation between the two countries. Naturally, he was tired. However, if he said this, no one would believe him. Discussing national affairs under the covers? Forget it. At this time, Cici finally rushed to the front hall and handed over the letter in her hand. Fan Xian looked at the handwriting on the letter and paused. When he tore open the letter and read, his mouth immediately opened slightly. The porridge almost flowed out. He thought to himself that this old woman was shameless and lowly for eating porridge. He was indeed a bit shameless and lowly, but he wasn't ready yet. Was he going to be tortured? He stood up and gazed at Deng Ziyu. With a long sigh he said, "Find a few people to go to Shazhou. They have to be capable and meticulous." Deng Ziyu said strangely, "The Suzhou matter is not settled yet." Fan Xian said with a pained expression, "Go pick someone up." "Pick who up?" "Your mistress." Winter was coming. Fan Xian was happy, however. The number of happy things had suddenly increased. It seemed to be a bit troublesome. "My fellow countrymen, I know I was wrong. Today is only the last day of the month. I have indeed been muddle-headed. However, very good. On the last day I'll ask for monthly votes. I'll work hard to get monthly votes. Although the 4th and 5th votes are all the same, it doesn't stop me from looking good. Today's chapter is about romance, but there is a hidden meaning within. I have to be careful. At the end of the month, everyone is relaxing. Also, don't talk about stud horses. Who says I'm not a stud horse? My novel is a stud horse novel. Didn't the introduction say that when I write novels, I am indeed a very stubborn person? I will only continue to write in the direction I should write. That's all. Please understand, my dream is to become Dumas and earn big money. To be continued. If you want to know what happens next, please go to www.cmfu.com. There are more chapters. Support the author and support the original reading. Chapter 406. Wanner had not yet arrived, but the people Fan Xian had sent out in Suzhou began to come back one by one. They had scattered Fan Xian's sinister seeds throughout Jiangnan and brought back the good news Fan Xian needed. The first to return was Xia Qifei. Fan Xian did not meet him in Hua Garden because Baoyue brothel was half ruined, so it was impossible to meet him there. In the end, he chose to go to Xia Ming's manor in the south of the city in the middle of the night. Fan Xian had paid for this garden. However, after he had come once with the third prince, he had never come again. The travel-worn Xia Qifei looked at Fan Xian, who was walking up the steps under the protection of the Tiger Guards, and jumped in fright. He had planned to go to Hua Garden in the afternoon but had been told to wait in the manor. He had not expected the commissioner to personally come. Respectfully welcoming Fan Xian into the study, these two illegitimate children did not exchange too many pleasantries. Fan Xian did not have the patience to express the warmth of a superior, so he directly entered the topic. Through Xia Qifei's report, Fan Xian's heart, which had been hanging in the air, finally relaxed. Ever since Xia Qifei had accepted the palace treasury's major bids, he had, with the help of the Overwatch Council, mobilized the Jianghu brothers of the Jiangnan water bandits and began to move toward the right path. However, they were, after all, Jianghu people. Fan Xian was always worried that the 7th Ming disciple would not be able to handle matters properly. Only tonight did he truly relax. It looked like Xia Qifei had indeed inherited some of the old Ming master's talent. He did not neglect the necessary skills of buying goods, bills of lading, opening roads and bribing officials. What made Fan Xian feel most at ease was that after Xia Ming's merchant group passed through Jiangbei, they made contact with the northern Qi people in a small town to the south of Cangzhou. On the northern Qi side, the little emperor had arranged for Chang Ningho's son, Wei Hua, to be the head of the brocade guard. Of course, there would not be any problems with the safety of the goods. However, Fan Xian was curious as to who had personally entered deep into the Qing kingdom and taken the risk to receive the first batch of goods. It was the commander himself. Xia Qifei himself seemed to be shocked at the meeting at the time. Fan Xian was also startled. He couldn't help but have a different opinion of Wei Hua. He held a high position, yet he dared to enter the Qing kingdom. He couldn't help but feel great disdain for the defensive power in the Cangzhou area. The northern Qi brocade guard was only responsible for the safety of the road to the north. In the past, it had been the northern Qi Empress Dowager and the eldest princess who had made the deal. After doing it for so many years, they were already familiar with it. Now, it was the little emperor and Fan Xian making the deal. This was their first deal, so they had to be careful. What about our people in the north? He suddenly asked with a frown. Xia Qifei carefully looked at him and took out a letter from his bosom. This is a letter that Lord Wang asked this lowly official to bring back. He also brought a gift to the south. Fan Xian accepted the letter and saw that it was indeed Wang Qingyan's unique handwriting. He didn't take the long box that Xia Qifei handed over and indicated for him to put it to the side. Shaking his head, he asked, Wang Qingyan is more afraid of death than I am. Of course he wouldn't foolishly head south. However, we have to have someone follow. Which merchant company is taking over the north? In reality, he knew that the Cui family's routes in the north had all been privately taken over by him. The Qing court had always thought that the northern Qi emperor controlled them. Only a few people in the Fan manor, the Yan family, and a few of Fan Xian's trusted aides knew about the matter of the second Fan prince privately controlling the northern smuggling routes. The Qing emperor only knew that the second Fan prince was in the north. He had not expected Fan Xian to have his young brother manage such a major matter. Fan Xian did not plan on telling this to Xia Qifei, so he only asked casually. He wanted to use Xia Qifei's mouth to find out how his brother was doing in the north. Unfortunately, at the time, Xia Qifei's attention was all on the extremely daring commander of the brocade guard and did not pay much attention to the merchant companies in the north. However, he had faintly heard some rumors. He heard that the merchant in the north responsible for handling the palace treasury's smuggled goods was ruthlessly mysterious. Normal people didn't even know if the boss was a man or a woman. Fan Xian smiled. A glimmer of relief rose to his eyes. It looked like Xia had finally learned to be low-key and endure. However, Haitang was in Jiangnan. Only he and Wang Qingyan were in the north. It was not convenient for the spy system of the 4th Bureau of the Overwatch Council to handle too many things for him. The northern Qi emperor would not make things difficult for him for his sake. However, for a young man to be in such a dangerous situation, it was truly hard on him. However, Fan Xian did not plan on sending people to help him. His experience of being reborn clearly told him that as long as it was cold, it would emerge through grinding. Xia had a talent for business. If he did not undergo such difficult and complicated grinding, it would truly be a pity. After chatting a bit more with Xia Qifei, Fan Xian admired the head of the Jiangnan water bandits in front of him more and more. Now he was his subordinate. It looked like subduing this person in Shazhou was indeed very beneficial to his Jiangnan plan. Everything will be done according to the established plan, Fan Xian said seriously. Fan Xian said seriously, Su Wenmao is in the palace treasury. I will leave Deng Ziyu in Suzhou. Deputy Ma Jie will handle the matter of transferring goods from the palace treasury. As for the matter of accounts, if you find it difficult to sort it out, listen to the opinions of those old officials. Those old officials were all good hands pulled from the Ministry of Revenue. They were a great gift that the Minister of Revenue Fan Jian had given to his son. It was ruthlessly simple to do some empty accounts and play some tricks. Xia Qifei made a sound of acknowledgement and hesitantly said, This is the first time. The route to the north has been opened, However, we can't hide it for too long. Fan Xian thought for a bit and a cold smile rose to his brows. What are you afraid of? Every year Xinjiang is smuggled. Who doesn't know? As long as we don't get hold of our weakness, who can do anything to us? Xia Qifei's heart froze. He found that the commissioner was indeed very daring and full of confidence. However, he kept thinking of another matter. His face couldn't help revealing a strange emotion. Fan Xian watched and couldn't help smiling. He gazed at him calmly and said, "Are you not satisfied with the Ming family matter?" Xia Qifei thought for a bit. The bits and pieces of this half a year taught him that it was best not to hide anything in front of this young man. Gritting his teeth, he gathered his courage and said, "Qingqing is not satisfied." Fan Xian gazed at him with a not quite there smile. The old Ming matriarch is already dead. Xia Qifei was silent. When the Ming garden was in chaos, he had been following orders to the north to deliver goods, so he had not participated in this matter. Along the way he had received the news. He had also seen the scene of the Jiangnan people wearing mourning. He couldn't help smiling bitterly and saying, "Although she died, it was still a glorious death." Fan Xian quietly said, "Do you know how the old Ming matriarch died?" Xia Qifei raised his head in shock and gazed at Fan Xian, thinking, "Did you not help me force her to death?" Suddenly his mind moved. He thought of how the hearts of the Jiangnan people were slightly chaotic and then calm, and how the Ming garden was unusually quiet after the funeral. He couldn't help but think of a terrifying possibility. "Ming Qingda?" he asked in disbelief. Fan Xian nodded his head coldly. "I won't hide this from you. It is a small matter for the emperor to take over the Ming family, but it is a difficult matter for him to take over the Ming family peacefully. The present situation is something I have plotted with great difficulty. Don't destroy it." Xia Qifei immediately understood everything. So, the commissioner and Ming Qingda had a secret agreement. He couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions in his heart. He also faintly felt fear. Would he become a useless abandoned pawn? Fan Xian's following words surprised him again. "You are not satisfied." "Actually, I am not satisfied either," Fan Xian smiled slightly and said. "The Ming family has 6 branches. Right now, you and I can only control 2 of them. After this matter, Ming Qingda has finally become the true master of the Ming family, but I cannot act openly. That old fox has tricked me. Do you think I won't have him return it?" Xia Qifei opened his mouth slightly. A fervent hope flashed through his eyes. "When do we act? Don't let the fever go to your head at the mention of revenge." Fan Xian seemed to be lecturing him. It was also like he was narrating some great, distant and personal cause. "The Jiangnan people's blood letters have long been sent to Jingdo. The emperor's edict to scold me should arrive in a few days," Fan Xian continued. "At this time, I will not act against Ming Qingda again." "I don't understand." Xia Qifei thought of something and said doubtfully, "What benefit does Ming Qingda gain by doing this? Would he be so childishly as to believe that as long as he lowers his head, the emperor will give him a way out?" Fan Xian glanced at him with praise and said, "He is just stalling for time." "Stalling for time?" "Correct." Fan Xian sighed. "Using his mother's life in exchange for a year's time. That day, I once said that your big brother does things even more ruthlessly than I do." "A year's time?" Xia Qifei asked with confusion. "What use can it have?" Naturally, Fan Xian would not tell him about the seemingly calm but unusually dangerous situation in Jingdo. He only smiled coldly and said, "Your big brother is groveling and enduring, swaying from side to side, all because he wants to see clearly the situation in court a year from now. As for you and me, we will just watch for a year. After a year, the other side would probably be unable to resist acting, right? After a year, he would be able to kill some people. Don't rush." Fan Xian persuaded Xia Qifei and at the same time convinced himself. "Your big brother is a clever person. In the end he is swaying from side to side. He wants to not offend either side, so in the end he will also die because of his cleverness. Because in the end he has no power." As Fan Xian said this, he suddenly thought of the 3 sentences Yi Luyun had said to him before his sword cut through half the building. Involuntarily his heart chilled. Could it be that the great grandmaster had seen further than him and had already seen some danger that he had not? After the imperial envoy was attacked in Baoyue brothel, the Jiangnan governor, Xueqing, was furious. He immediately made a powerful response. All of the Ming Garden's private soldiers were disarmed. Because of the old Ming matriarch's death, the enmity the Jiangnan people had toward Fan Xian had also lessened somewhat because of Fan Xian's injury. The human heart had always been such a strange thing. In short, the power of Ming Garden had once again been weakened. It had become a piece of dough in Fan Xian's hands, allowing him to knead it however he wanted. However, the present situation in Jingdo and the imperial edict that was about to arrive forced him to push back the cooking of the steamed buns. Even if Ming Qingda completely defected to me, I would not accept it. The corners of Fan Xian's lips twitched and he said something that made Xia Qifei unusually happy. Fan Xian calmly said, I am a very vengeful person. Perhaps you don't care about the water bandits' brothers who were killed in front of the Jiangnan restaurant, but I remember that a number of the 6th Bureau swordsmen I sent to protect you died. Xia Qifei's sorrow appeared slightly. Fan Xian continued, Ming Qingda is a clever person. As he said earlier, he thought that in the face of enormous benefits, I could accept the deaths of these seemingly normal people with a smile. However, he was wrong. He quietly said, the Ming family asked people to kill my people, so I will kill their people. Although it was his mother who did it, the son pays the mother's debts. Isn't that very fair? Xia Qifei couldn't resist smiling and bowed respectfully. Sir is right, it is very fair. Fan Xian patted Xia Qifei's shoulder. Let's not talk about those uninteresting things for now. In this half a year you should learn to manage the route to the north well. At the same time, maintain a good relationship with the Xiong family of Lingnan and the Sun family of Quanzhou. As for Yang Jimei, you can also associate with her. In the future, you will have to manage such an enormous family property of the Ming family. You must maintain a good relationship with these giant merchants. Xia Qifei heard the meaning in the commissioner's words and couldn't help but be slightly shocked. He immediately said, thank you for fulfilling my wish. It's still early, Fan Xian calmly said. Fan Xian calmly said, however, I have already told Ming Qingda that you must appear at the annual festival in the 7th year of the Qin calendar. After Xia Qifei's great shock, a complicated joy welled up in his heart. Was he going to return to his ancestry? He had wandered the Jianghu for so many years. Finally he could return to Ming Garden. Leaving Xia Qifei's manor, Fan Xian disapproved of Xia Qifei's last joy and the tears in his eyes. Was it really so important to return to his ancestry? After all, he was a person with 2 lives of experience. Although he knew how much importance the people of today placed on bloodlines, he still did not quite understand and even looked down on it. The ones who gave birth to me are my parents. The ones who raised me are my parents. If you see me as a son, then I will see you as a parent. If you see me as an enemy, then I will see you as an enemy. That chest of silver was a bit too heavy. The second person to return to Suzhouhua Garden surprised Fan Xian. At that time, Fan Xian was worrying in his study about whether or not he should bring the chest of silver in front of the hall when he went to Hangzhou to pick up water. That chest of silver was a bit too heavy. Just as he was thinking hard, a shadow appeared in front of his table and gave him a fright. Next time you enter, please knock. Fan Xian glanced at the shadow and then lowered his head to read the council newspaper. The shadow suddenly tilted his head. His deathly pale face shone through the completely black clothing. It seemed to be very interested in Fan Xian. After all, even the director treated him like a nephew, but Fan Xian was different. Yun Jilan has returned to Dongyi. Fan Xian raised his head. He knew this meant that the guerrilla warfare between the 6th Bureau of the Overwatch Council and the Aces of Dongyi had finally come to an end after continuing for 4 months. While Fan Xian was battling wits and strength against the enemy in the 3 large workshops of the palace treasury, at the bidding conference in Suzhou, and in the Ming Garden, the silent killing on the other secret front was actually an important link that could completely turn the situation around. Furthermore, the battle on that front would certainly be even bloodier and more terrifying. He was silent for a moment and then solemnly said, "How many brothers in the council sacrificed?" 17. The Shadow's words still did not have any obvious emotional fluctuations. How many people died on Dongyi's side? This was a topic that Fan Xian was very interested in. 17. Oh, 1 for 1. It seems we didn't lose out. Although he said he didn't lose out, an evil fire still flashed through Fan Xian's eyes. Gently tapping his finger on the surface of the table, he slowly said, "Remember this debt firmly. After some time we'll go and get it back." The Shadow said, "Are you going to get it back or am I?" Fan Xian glanced at him and said with amusement, "Can you beat your idiot brother?" The Shadow was not angry. "I can't beat him, but you also can't beat him." Fan Xian thought of the power of Yi Liuyun's strike and admitted this reality. "Although I can't beat him, it doesn't mean I can't kill him." The Shadow looked at him. He didn't know where this young man's confidence came from to say he could kill a great grandmaster. The study fell silent. Fan Xian continued his official duties and didn't even glance at the shadow in front of him. In the end, it was the shadow himself who broke the silence. I heard. Yi Luyun came? Fan Xian glanced at him and asked curiously, how do you know it was Yi Luyun? Because Sigujien is still in Dongyi. Fan Xian sighed and shook his head. He thought to himself that even the shadow, someone who only knew how to kill, could make such a simple deduction. What exactly was Yi Luyun thinking? Will Sigujien not sneak out of Dongyi? Although this was what Fan Xian thought, he still couldn't help but habitually want to frame Dongyi and not want such a large crack to appear within the Qin kingdom. The shadow was silent for a moment and then said, he hasn't left the sword hut in 6 years. Fan Xian was shocked. He knew the shadow's identity, so he trusted his judgment and source of information. If it was truly like this, then this matter was too strange. No wonder the Qin people had framed Sigujien countless times and Dongyi had never had any direct reaction. Fan Xian suddenly thought of a wonderful possibility. Say. He propped up his chin and asked energetically, is it possible that your idiot brother has already died? No. The shadow's words could only be met with a sigh from Fan Xian. As long as he doesn't go out, it's fine. Fan Xian immediately thought of another wonderful thing and smiled. As long as Sigujien doesn't go out, I'm not afraid someone will kill me. The shadow thought for a bit and silently accepted this reality. He then asked, I heard Yi Luyun came. This was the second time the shadow had said this. It was clear Fan Xian didn't want to discuss this problem. He hadn't expected the other party to be so persistent. He couldn't resist saying angrily, I also heard love has returned. Is it Yi Luyun? Did he come or not? Is that important? It is very important, the shadow said with a rare seriousness. The shadow used a rarely seen seriousness and said, my idol is Sir Wu. The person I want to defeat the most is Sigujien. If I could fight with Sir Yi Luyun, it would be enough to comfort me for the rest of my life. Sir, I am jealous of you. Fan Xian was defeated. Sincerely he said, don't be jealous of me. Next time something as good as this happens, I will certainly leave it for you. As for Yi Luyun, I can promise you that if you fight with him, the one to die will certainly be you, and it will be a very thorough death. The shadow was silent. He then turned and left, disappearing into the darkness. Fan Xian suddenly thought of something. Facing the completely empty night, he quietly said, I'm going to Hangzhou the day after tomorrow. Come with me. He didn't know if Haitang would follow him to Hangzhou to pick up Wanner. For the sake of safety, he had the shadow at his side. It was much more reassuring. After that night, Fan Xian and Haitang resumed their usual interactions. However, occasionally when their gazes met, there would be something more unclear. Strangely, Haitang was as lazy as ever and quiet as ever. It was Fan Xian who became awkward. Occasionally, a smiling expression would appear in Haitang's eyes, which made Fan Xian very angry. However, this reality also made Fan Xian understand that even if he used underhanded methods to get the news out, he might not be able to tie such a unique woman to his side for a lifetime. Fan Xian had once encouraged Ruoruo to travel around, much less someone like Duo. However, Fan Xian was just as selfish as he had always admitted. There were very few young men in this world who dared to marry Haitang Duo. After he made such a big scandal, who would dare to marry her? Never marrying was fine as long as she didn't marry someone else. An evil smile flashed through his eyes. He tore open the letter Wang Qinian had sent back and hurriedly scanned it. He couldn't resist smiling again. It looked like Lao Wang was not having a good time in northern Qi. The burden on his back was too heavy. It was not as comfortable as being by his side. This letter was asking about the date of his return. Fan Xian understood his emotions. Being in a foreign country, one would indeed feel lonely. Furthermore, once things went wrong, regardless of whether it was the Overwatch Council or the court, they could all abandon him. This feeling of being an abandoned child was not good. As he thought about it, he suddenly sighed. Tonight, he had first met Xia Qifei, then the Shadow, and even Wang Qinian, who was far away in the north. They were all capable subordinates of his. As for the first two brothers, they both carried a blood feud with them. They were the youngest members of their large clans, drifting about the world, unable to return to their homes. In fact, wasn't his own life experience the same? The gathering of abandoned children would, in the end, become exciting. On the first day of the month, I seriously canvassed for monthly votes. Last month, 4th place and 3,000 yuan in prize money, all thanks to everyone's votes. I express my sincere thanks. This month, I still have to seriously canvass for monthly votes. However, at the end of December I told everyone that during this year's spring festival, my whole family will be returning to our hometown for the new year. I haven't been back in 10 years. Not to mention the many matters and the lack of time, the important thing is that our hometown is a small mountain village. There really is no place to write. I also don't have the habit of storing up manuscripts. Everyone knows this, so I'm also thinking about how to deal with it. In any case, I have to ask for leave in advance. This month's updates will certainly not be sufficient. As for monthly votes, if everyone is willing to vote for me, please do so. As for the book review, I have a few words to say. First, don't be rude in the discussion. Don't use foul language. I'll have to trouble everyone to maintain that. Second, regardless of whether you're male or female, if you want to scold Fan Xian, please do so because I'm writing about a selfish boy. But please, don't scold me, I'm very weak. Haha, the important thing is, everyone is an adult. You should understand the relationship between the characters in the book and the author. Third, thank you everyone. Please have some tea. To be continued. If you want to know what happens next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. There are more chapters. Support the author, support the original reading. Chapter 407. After Fan Xian finished reading the council report, he felt his eyes dry up. He couldn't resist cursing a few times in his heart. When he was young, his name and courtesy name had been arranged by those people. His surname was Fan, his first name was Xian, and his courtesy name was Anji. Now that he thought about it, this name was naturally given to him by the emperor in the palace. However, ever since he entered Jingdo, or more accurately since last year's spring examination, when had he ever had a day of leisure? Occasionally he would ask himself. Using the knowledge and experience of 2 lives to judge, Fan Xian had to come to a conclusion that did not make him happy. The emperor in the palace had treated him well. Although he knew that the emperor had given him so much power, a large part of it was because the emperor needed someone like him to exist to balance the situation in court, and he had indeed demonstrated this ability. The royal family was heartless. For the emperor to be where he was today, on one hand, it had to be said that it was his mother's grace. On the other hand, it showed that the emperor did indeed have some father-son affection for him. At least he was not like Han Wu, who was still alive and living better and better. Of course, Fan Xian would not revel in this father-son affection. He was strangely clear-headed and calm. Thus, he was still a bit angry at the emperor for throwing him to Jiangnan and giving him so much work and such troublesome things. He was not a donkey, although Haitang seemed to like ordering Xia around like a donkey. He rubbed his eyes and took out the rectangular box beside him. Curiously, he tore open the seal on the outside. This was a gift Wang Qinian had carefully asked Xia Qifei to bring back. The letter said it was for him, but it did not say what it was. The box slowly opened, revealing the true appearance of the item inside. Fan Xian narrowed his eyes. It was a sword that did not look extraordinary, but emanated an ancient aura. He took out the long sword. His right hand gripped the hilt steadily and slowly pulled. Without a sound, the edge of the sword left its sheath. Like the layer of snow on Song Mountain, like the smear of jade in North Lake, like a wisp of wind in Jiangnan, the clear and bright sword light rippled in the study. It was incomparably gentle, but there was a bone-piercing coldness in the gentleness. Fan Xian's expression changed slightly. He could see the value and sharpness of this sword. What particularly moved him was that the killing intent in this gentleness was quite similar to his own strange personality. He flipped his wrist and casually waved it twice. He felt that the weight of the sword was very suitable. The blade of the sword pierced through the air silently and brushed the candle 3 times, but the candle did not move at all. In the past, the weapons Fan Xian was used to using were nothing more than a hidden crossbow and the slender pure black dagger in his boot. Although he was very efficient when killing people, in the end he did not have a weapon that suited him, particularly if he was fighting a true ace head-on. Because he had been stabbed by the shadow, Fan Xian had learned Sigusword's secret very effectively. These days he had focused on practicing and could be considered to have made some progress. That night he had killed Yuan Jingming, which was already proof of this. With Sigusword in his heart, Fan Xian increasingly wanted to wear a good sword. When he killed Yuan Meng, he had borrowed a flexible sword from Haitang. I can't live off a woman, and I'm embarrassed to keep borrowing her flexible sword. Fan Xian lightly flicked the edge of the sword and listened to a slight buzzing sound. He couldn't help but nod his head in approval, thinking that Lao Wang's flattery was truly appropriate. He picked up the piece of paper in the box and looked at it. On it was written Wang Qinian's skillful flattery. First, he regretted that he shouldn't have peeked at Sir Fan's letter last year. Finally, he talked about the origin of this sword. So, this sword was the sword of the last emperor of the Wei Kingdom. Back then, the Wei Kingdom had been broken up by the Qing Kingdom. The Zhan family had taken advantage of the situation to rise, but the treasures in the royal palace had long been stolen and sold by the eunuchs. This sword had since then also wandered among the people, never to be seen again. It was only after 20 years that traces of it finally appeared. After Wang Qinian learned of it, he spent a large sum of money to buy it. He then carefully made some external changes before sending it to Jiangnan. So, it is this emperor's sword. Fan Xian looked at the sword and smiled, but he did not think much of it in his heart. If this sword truly had an imperial aura attached to it, the Northern Wei emperor would not have died back then. However, he immediately furrowed his brows. Wang Qinian now knew that he was the emperor's illegitimate child. He had spent a large sum of money to buy the Wei emperor's sword and had traveled thousands of li to give it to him. Was this purely flattery, or was he using this sword to hint at something? Fan Xian shook his head and sighed. He thought to himself, Wang Qinian was such an old man with a wife and daughter. How could he be so daring? He was probably thinking too much. He felt a bit uncomfortable in his heart. It looked like he was the same as the emperor. They were both suspicious people in their bones. Fan Xian blew out the candle and left the study to sleep peacefully. He couldn't resist muttering, Zorro? The room door closed, the moonlight was still, and the candle had broken into 4 pieces. One was frozen on the table and the other 3 were rolling restlessly. 3 days later, the angels from Jingdo finally arrived in Suzhou. The angels were not those eunuchs with wings. They were eunuchs responsible for helping the emperor send messages. They could not fly, so they could only ride horses. Naturally, they were slower. Hua Garden was tidied up. The courtyard was swept, the incense table was set up, and the related matters were prepared. With Fan Xian in the lead, the third prince as his deputy, everyone in the Qinian unit of the Overwatch Council, as well as the 6 bureau guards and tiger guards, dozens of people stood obediently in front of the front yard, waiting for the arrival of the imperial edict. As the northern Qi Saint girl, it was not convenient for Hai Tang to be present. She had long left. However, Fan Xian and his group waited for a long time and still did not see anyone come. Fan Xian was a bit annoyed. He called for someone to bring over a grand wooden chair. He sat in the corridor and had Cici peel melon seeds beside him while he chatted idly with the third prince. Deng Ziyu's expression appeared awkward. He moved closer to his ear and said, Sir, be careful. We have to wait. His gaze flickered to the side. Fan Xian knew what he wanted to say. The subordinates of the Overwatch Council did not matter. The third prince was now dead set on following him. However, his actions did indeed appear to be somewhat disrespectful of the emperor's authority. There were also 7 tiger guards beside him, as well as a few tiger guards responsible for the third prince's safety. Who knew whether or not there were people the emperor had sent to monitor him? Fan Xian narrowed his eyes and didn't say anything. During the trip to northern Qi as well as the trip to Jiangnan, Gouda and the others had actually followed him. The 2 sides had gotten along fairly well. At least, they had not dragged him down or done anything that made him uncomfortable. Thus, Fan Xian had purposely revealed his true side for them to see. In any case, these 7 people would probably be his personal bodyguards for the rest of his life. Then, he would use the endless small mistakes to have them get used to his future big mistakes. Sometimes a person's heart could not be bought. It could only be seduced. It was like this between men and women. It was actually also like this between men. As for the tiger guards beside the third prince. Fortunately, Fan Xian didn't have to wait too long. Following the sound of a cannon salute from outside, a few palace guards took the lead and escorted a eunuch into the garden. Fan Xian had long stood up. Holding the third prince's hand, he went forward to greet them. He bowed deeply and quietly listened to the edict. The eunuch who came to announce the edict was Eunuch Yao. He was also an old acquaintance of Fan Xian's. The 2 of them exchanged glances. Eunuch Yao knew that this young master was anxious from waiting. His heart trembled. He quickly skipped over some of the procedures that could be skipped. He directly pulled open the bright yellow double damask edict and began to read it in a sharp voice. The contents of the imperial edict were not out of Fan Xian's expectations. Some of the sentences inside were even things that Fan Xian and the emperor had already discussed in secret letters. As the ruler of a country, he had to express shock and anger at the chaos in Jiangnan. The edict used seemingly harsh words to reprimand Fan Xian. However, in the edict, Not a single word mentioned the Ming family. Fan Xian knelt on the ground. A glimmer of a smile flashed across the corners of his lips. This was as it should be. How could a mere Jiangnan noble family affect the heart of heaven? Although the matter this time could not be considered small, tens of thousands of people's blood letters had been sent to the capital, and a few rotten scholars were even going to file a lawsuit in Jingdou in front of the emperor. The emperor issuing an edict to reprimand Fan Xian could be considered giving the people of the world an explanation. However, in the imperial edict and the official documents of the court, they would never mention the Ming family and criticize Fan Xian for not handling matters carefully. As for what it was, the court did not say a word. This was what was called politics. It was just a few words of reprimand. Of course, it also fined Fan Xian a year's salary. There was no other punishment. Eunuch Yao's sharp voice stopped. Fan Xian and the others rose to give their thanks. They also asked about the emperor's health and other boring matters. Only then did Fan Xian accept the imperial edict with both hands and hand it to the official beside him to put away. Fine salary again? Fan Xian couldn't resist muttering. My old father and I haven't had any income these years. Who's going to support the family? He and the third prince walked in first. Eunuch Yao, with his body hunched and a fawning smile, followed behind them with small quick steps. Lao Yao, you have to return the silver to me. Otherwise I can only eat porridge. Fan Xian smiled and scolded. Eunuch Yao put on a bashful face and hurried forward a few steps. Please spare me. Who doesn't know that you are the best at earning silver in the world? You've been in Jiangnan for less than half a year, and you've earned tens of millions of liang for the court. Why would you need my scraps of silver? As Eunuch Yao spoke, he silently and quickly glanced toward the third prince out of the corner of his eyes. Fan Xian's earlier joke could be said to be a big deal or a small one. In the past, the Fan family had indeed fed the eunuchs in the palace well. Of course, he knew that Fan Xian did not think much of his gains. However, this mischievous joke had been said in front of the third prince. Eunuch Yao knew that although the little prince was young, his heart was ruthless. He couldn't help but feel a bit afraid. Unexpectedly, he saw from the corner of his eye that the third prince's expression was calm, as if he hadn't heard it. He then thought that since Fan Xian dared to say such things in front of the third prince, then he must have a sense of propriety. Eunuch Yao's heart trembled. He knew that the things the palace guessed might not be wrong. The third prince and Sir Fan Jr. were indeed like that. I don't have the guts to touch the silver earned for the court. Are you, perhaps, advising me to be corrupt? The three of them had already entered the central hall. Fan Xian and the third prince sat on either side of the main seats. Eunuch Yao stood to the side. Hearing these words, he forced a smile and said, Sir Fan Jr., please don't make fun of me. Fan Xian smiled and waved his hand to indicate for him to sit. Eunuch Yao quickly sat down. This long journey had indeed made him very tired. I thought you would come earlier. You made me wait for a while, Fan Xian said as he ate sunflower seeds. The third prince was also imitating Fan Xian's manner of eating sunflower seeds. Eunuch Yao looked closely and suddenly felt that his eyes were a bit blurry. These brothers in the upper seats were indeed too similar. It was just that one was a size bigger and one was a size smaller. He quickly smiled apologetically and explained, I indeed arrived at the courier station outside the city yesterday. However, I had to follow the rules and could only enter the city today. There are 2 copies of the imperial edict. I went to the governor's manor first, so I came late. Please don't blame my legs for not being nimble. He carefully watched Fan Xian's expression and found that this young noble, who was so popular in court it was almost purple, did not show any signs of true anger. Only then did he let out a breath. In reality, with the identity of an imperial edict eunuch, he was like the emperor's mouthpiece. He was incomparably arrogant when he walked through the 7 roads and provinces. Even earlier in Xueqing's manor, the Jiangnan governor Xueqing had been very courteous toward this eunuch Yao of the palace. However, he could be arrogant anywhere. Only in Hua Garden did eunuch Yao not dare to be arrogant. Putting aside the fact that Fan Xian was some imperial envoy, just the identity of these 2 princes, and Fan Xian's overwhelming power was enough to make eunuch Yao incomparably well behaved. Of course, I know you have to go to Governor Xue first, Fan Xian said without good humor. Do you think I don't even know this little rule? He shook his head and said, What did the emperor say to the governor? Eunuch Yao thought for a bit and said awkwardly, Actually, it was pretty much the same as the edict he gave you. Xueqing was also fined a year of salary? Fan Xian raised his head and asked with interest. However, the tone of his question seemed to be a bit of schadenfreude. Eunuch Yao chuckled sinisterly and raised 3 fingers. Fine for 3 years. Now I feel more balanced mentally. Fan Xian smiled and threw away the sunflower seed shells. I said the emperor was wise and benevolent. He would not let a pitiful person like me take all the blame. Eunuch Yao smiled bitterly and thought to himself, what are you saying? How am I supposed to respond? Fortunately, Fan Xian immediately changed the topic and asked, why did they find an old man like you to come on such a long and arduous journey? Are there no young and capable eunuchs in the palace? At the time, Lao Dai was training a few. As you know, after that incident, although he was recently transferred back from that pitiful place, this matter was delayed. This time, the imperial edict coming to Jiangnan was important, so I had to make a trip. Eunuch Yao sighed. Is Lao Dai doing well? Fan Xian asked. Eunuch Yao smiled. Thanks to your great fortune, these old brothers in the palace are doing pretty well. The Qin kingdom's palace was not the same as in history. Since the founding of the country, it had been very guarded against eunuchs. Particularly after the previous emperor ascended the throne 20 years ago, he strictly prevented eunuchs from interfering in national affairs. The palace was very strict. It was difficult for eunuchs to wield power, so they were not divided into many factions. On the contrary, these eunuchs knew that it was difficult for them to live in society and were very united. Ever since Fan Xian entered the capital, he had paid great attention to building a good relationship with these seemingly unremarkable eunuchs. When he was purging the first bureau, he had let Lao Dai's nephew go, which was the same as letting Lao Dai go. Furthermore, he had taken good care of them and never made excessive requests of these eunuchs. Most importantly, each time Fan Xian interacted with these eunuchs, he did not think of them as strange or evil people. He treated them as normal and did not purposely curry favor or humiliate them. He was not warm in front of them but sinister behind their backs. It was this way of doing things that successfully made the eunuchs like this young commissioner very much. As long as they are doing well. Fan Xian couldn't help but shake his head. Qin Kingdom's eunuchs generally did not have too many bad records. These abnormal people were indeed a bit pitiful. He pretended to mention it carelessly. Lao Dai didn't train many young ones, however last year that little guy called Hongzhu in the royal study seemed to be quite clever. Hongzhu has already gone to the Eastern Palace. The deputy eunuch is the Emperor's grace, Eunuch Yao replied carefully. Everyone in the palace knew that Hongzhu had been chased out of the royal study because Fan Xian had said something in front of the emperor. The rumor was that Hongzhu had been blinded by money and dared to extend his hand to Sir Fan Jr. for a bribe. Fan Xian's expression darkened slightly. After thinking for a while, he sighed and said, "This is also good. This kind of overly clever person is never suitable to serve the emperor. He doesn't know when to advance or retreat, and he doesn't know when to stop." Too clever? This was clearly derogatory. Eunuch Yao thought to himself that the rumors were indeed true. Hongzhu didn't usually look stupid, so how did he dare to provoke Sir Fan Jr.? It looked like that kid wouldn't be able to climb out of the palace. After sending off Eunuch Yao, Fan Xian led the third prince to the study. After a moment of silence, he quietly said, "Do you understand why?" The third prince thought for a while. In the end, he was still young and didn't understand the reason. He helplessly shook his head. It's the end of spring and the beginning of summer. Fan Xian lowered his eyelids slightly and said, "We are about to go to Hangzhou. On the way I still have to make a trip out. The Jiangnan matter has basically been settled. At most, the palace will keep you by my side for a year, which is near the end of the year. We will definitely return to the capital. When we come out again it will only be me and not you." "What?" the third prince asked in surprise. "There is no why." Fan Xian smiled slightly and said, "In the eyes of some people, perhaps I have a strange and unfriendly aura. You are a true prince of royal blood. If you are with me for a long time, I'm afraid you will be infected with some bad habits." "But," the third prince hurriedly said, "following Sir to Jiangnan to learn, this is something father personally promised." "Father? Emperor?" Fan Xian couldn't resist shaking his head. "If the Empress Dowager misses you, her youngest grandson, the emperor can only summon you back." The third prince fell silent. He knew in his heart that his imperial grandmother was different from other grandmothers. She did not like her youngest grandson very much. Instead, she especially valued the crown prince and his second brother. "In other words," Fan Xian said, "starting from next year, you will be alone in Jingdo and I cannot always stay by your side." The third prince raised his head. A ruthlessness that did not match appeared on his childish and beautiful face. "Sir, don't worry. I will live well and wait for your return." "You're saying childish things again?" Fan Xian smiled and scolded. By the emperor's side, who would dare to do anything to you? He slowly said, however, starting from now you must stand out, at least you must let the officials in court and the soldiers in the military know you and get used to you. Get used to what? Get used to the fact that you are also an upright prince and not a child who only knows how to run his nose, Fan Xian said coldly. Get used to you, is also possible. It's also possible for you to do the same. The third prince had been with Fan Xian for half a year. He had long admired this elder brother to the bone. He felt that being by Fan Xian's side was far more pleasant than the cold atmosphere in the royal palace. At such a young age, he could only believe and was only willing to believe what Fan Xian said. However, he still asked curiously, Sir, shouldn't you first endure silently? You once said that the tallest tree in the forest will be destroyed by the wind. You are still not a towering tree. Fan Xian smiled and rubbed the third prince's head, although this action was disrespectful. Since the emperor has you follow me down to Jiangnan, you can no longer hide. Since you can't hide, then I might as well stand out and stand behind you. Let's see which wind dares to blow against you. The third prince scratched his face, not quite understanding. I want to send a message to Jingdo through eunuch Yao's mouth. Fan Xian pulled back his hand and slowly closed his eyes. You are the person I have chosen. The third prince suddenly gathered his courage and said, even if the crown prince, in the end, it is still father's choice. Fan Xian didn't open his eyes. He only quietly said, the eldest princess has chosen your second brother. The Empress Dowager has chosen your brother. Although the emperor has not chosen, many people have already begun to choose. Why would they care if I am one more? There is no more snow outside the window. I wish everyone good health. I wish my friends in the south all the best. If you want to know what happens next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.